The dining room went silent as my stepmother's palm struck my face. Everyone stared at the heirloom shattered at my feet, convinced I had finally snapped in a jealous rage. Then my brother leaned in, his breath trembling against my ear, and whispered the truth. She did it herself. That was when I realized the broken plate was no accident, but the opening move in a war she had been preparing for years. My name is Lena Cartwright, and if there is one thing I have learned in 29 years of navigating the treacherous waters of my family, it is that disasters are rarely accidental. As a risk architect for Lumisphere Stratagem Labs, I spend my days building digital fortresses, predicting where a system will fail before the first line of code is even compromised. I see patterns where others see chaos. I see intent where others see misfortune. Yet, as I drove my silver sedan off the highway and onto the winding, manicured streets of Ridgewood Hills that Tuesday evening, I failed to predict the one catastrophe that would bring my carefully constructed life crashing down. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the perfect lawns of the suburbs. It was a landscape of aggressive normalcy, the kind of place where the grass is cut to an exact inch and the secrets are buried deep beneath the rhododendrons. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that always accompanied a visit to my father's house. Marla had insisted on this dinner. She had called me 3 times during the workday, her voice pitching into that saccharine register she reserved for when she wanted something, claiming we needed to celebrate my recent promotion. I should have seen the red flag right then. Marla did not celebrate my victories. She tolerated them, usually by finding a way to make them sound like failures of character. But guilt is a potent currency in the Cartwright household, and my father, Ray, had been sounding tired lately on the phone. So, I engaged the parking brake in the driveway, took a deep breath of the cool suburban air, and walked into the trap. The house smelled of potpourri and old tension. It was the smell of my childhood after my mother died, a scent that Marla had introduced to mask the lingering traces of the woman she had replaced. When I entered the dining room, I stopped cold. It was not set for a casual Tuesday family meal. It was staged. Tall, white taper candles flickered in the center of the table, their flames dancing in the draft from the hallway. The good linens, the Irish lace tablecloth that we were forbidden from touching as children, was draped perfectly over the mahogany. Crystal wine glasses caught the candlelight, throwing sharp prisms against the walls. And there, sitting directly in the center of the table like a monarch on a throne, was the plate. It was my grandmother's heirloom serving platter, a massive, oval piece of bone china hand-painted with delicate blue violets and rimmed in 24-karat gold. Growing up, this object had attained a mythical status. It was the holy grail of the china cabinet. I remembered being 7 years old, reaching a finger toward the glass, and hearing my father say, gently but firmly, that I would never be responsible enough to hold it. It was too precious. It was legacy. Seeing it out tonight, filled with a mound of roasted potatoes, felt wrong. It felt like a prop in a play I had not rehearsed. "Lena, you made it!" Marla cooed, sweeping into the room. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of a bruised peach. Her hair sprayed into a helmet of golden perfection. She looked every inch the doting matriarch. She enveloped me in a hug that felt less like an embrace and more like a frisking. "Hello?" "Marla," I said, extricating myself. "The table looks elaborate." "Well, it is a special occasion," she beamed, turning to the other guests. I had not realized we had an audience until that moment. The Hendersons, a couple from the church council, were seated near the sideboard, holding glasses of sherry. Our Lena has finally made it to the big leagues, a promotion, though I admit, I still do not quite understand what a risk architect does. It sounds so cold, doesn't it? Dealing with numbers all day instead of people. She smiled at Mrs. Henderson. "I always tell Lena, a career is wonderful, darling, but women who chase the corner office often forget the most important thing. Family warms you at night. Spreadsheets do not." I forced a smile, the kind I used in boardrooms when a male client explained my own job to me. The promotion comes with a significant raise. Marla, it means I can finally pay off the rest of the medical bills for Dad. The smile on Marla's face didn't flicker, but her eyes hardened, just for a fraction of a second, a glint of steel behind the velvet. Of course, dear, money is always on your mind. Sit, sit. I took my seat. My father was at the head of the table, looking diminished. He smiled at me, a weak, watery expression that broke my heart. He looked thinner than the last time I had seen him, his skin possessing the gray pallor of old parchment. "Proud of you, Bean," he murmured, using his childhood nickname for me. "Thanks, Dad." Across from me sat my brother, Evan. If Marla was the predator in the room, Evan was the prey who had decided to play dead. He was 24, but tonight, he looked like a frightened teenager. He was hunched over his plate, his eyes darting around the room but never landing on mine. Usually, Evan would be hitting me up for a loan or cracking jokes to diffuse the tension. Tonight, he was silent. His thumbs were not even moving on his phone. He was just gripping it like a lifeline. Dinner was a performance art piece of passive aggression. Marla held court, telling stories that subtly rewrote history, painting herself as the savior of the widower and his unruly children. I ate mechanically, my senses on high alert. I watched Marla's hands. They were manicured, the nails painted a deep crimson. I noticed a tremor in them. Marla was nervous. Why would she be nervous in her own queendom? She kept circling the table. She was like a shark in silk, moving behind our chairs to refill wine, to adjust a napkin, but she kept returning to the center, hovering near the heirloom plate. "More potatoes, Mrs. Henderson?" Marla asked, her voice trilling. "Oh, I couldn't possibly," the neighbor replied. "Lena?" Marla turned to me. "You look thin. Too much stress, I imagine. You need to eat." She reached for the heavy platter. Everything happened in slow motion. It is a phenomenon I have studied in crisis management, tachypsychia, the distortion of time during trauma. I saw Marla's hand reach for the rim of the plate. I saw my own hand resting on the tablecloth, nowhere near the center. I saw Evan look up, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrified realization. Marla did not pick the plate up. She nudged it. It was a subtle, calculated movement of her wrist, a flick masked by the act of reaching. The heavy porcelain platter slid off the polished wood of the table edge. I instinctively jerked back to avoid the falling hot food, my hands flying up in a defensive posture. Crash. The sound was not just a noise, it was a physical blow. The explosion of china shattering against the hardwood floor seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Roast potatoes scattered like shrapnel across the Persian rug. The blue violets, painted 80 years ago by a master craftsman, were reduced to jagged, white dust. Silence descended. Absolute, suffocating silence. I looked down at the destruction, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had not touched it. I knew I had not touched it. "Oh my God," Marla whispered. She staggered back, clutching her chest, her face contorted into a mask of horror. She looked at the broken shards. Then she looked at me. Her eyes welled with instant tears. "Lena," she choked out. "Why? Why would you do that?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "I didn't," I stammered, my voice sounding small in the large room. "I didn't touch it. It just fell." "Just fell?" Marla's voice rose, cracking with manufactured hysteria. She turned to the Hendersons, then to my father. "You all saw it. She snatched at it. She was angry because I mentioned her weight, and she snatched it right off the table." "Marla, that's not true," I said, standing up, my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I was sitting right here. My hands were on the table." "Stop it! Just stop lying!" Marla screamed. She lunged forward, closing the distance between us. "You have always been this way. Jealous, destructive. You couldn't stand that this was the one thing your father loved that wasn't about you." "Marla, calm down," my father said, his voice trembling. "It was an accident." It was violence! Ray! Marla shrieked. She was shaking now. A full-body tremor that looked terrifyingly real. Look at her! Look at her face! She's furious. I don't feel safe, Ray. I have told you for years. She has a temper just like her mother did, and I am afraid. I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the lie. The risk architect in me was trying to analyze the data, trying to find the logical inconsistency to refute her, but the human in me was drowning. Marla stepped into my personal space. I could smell her perfume, heavy and cloying, mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline. "You ungrateful, hateful girl," she hissed. And then she struck me. It was not a slap of passion. It was a calculated assault. Her palm connected with my cheekbone with a force that snapped my head to the side. The sound of flesh on flesh was almost as loud as the breaking plate. The room spun. A sharp, copper taste filled my mouth. Blood. I had bitten my tongue. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my stinging cheek. The Hendersons gasped. My father made a sound like a wounded animal, half sob, half protest. "Marla!" Dad cried out. "She came at me!" Marla sobbed, burying her face in her hands, collapsing onto the nearest chair in a heap of misery. "Did you see her? She lunged at me. I was just trying to protect myself. Oh God, I can't live like this. I can't live in fear of a stepdaughter who goes crazy every time she doesn't get her way." I stood frozen. My cheek burned as if it had been branded. But the physical pain was distant, secondary to the cold shock spreading through my veins. I looked at the Hendersons. They were looking at me with wide, fearful eyes. They believed her. They saw the broken heirloom, the screaming stepmother, the violent daughter standing over the mess. I looked at my father. He was rubbing his temples, his eyes squeezed shut, as if by not seeing the scene he could make it disappear. He was not coming to my defense. He was retreating into his shell, just as he always did. "I didn't touch the plate," I said, my voice steady but icy. "And I didn't lunge at you, Marla." "Get out," Marla wept, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Just get out before you hurt someone else." I looked at Evan. My brother was still sitting at the table. He had not moved during the entire explosion. He was staring at the pile of broken china near his feet, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Evan," I said, "you saw it. Tell them." Evan looked up. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw pure, unadulterated terror in them. It was not fear of me. It was fear for himself. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking. He walked toward me, navigating around the debris field of our grandmother's legacy. I thought he was going to hug me. I thought he was going to stand by my side. He leaned in close, invading my personal space just as Marla had, but without the aggression. He smelled of fear and cheap deodorant. He brought his lips right to my ear. So close his trembling breath tickled the fine hairs on my neck. "She did it herself," he whispered. The words were barely audible, a ghost of a sentence. I pulled back to look at him, but he had already averted his gaze. He turned to our father, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Maybe Lena should go." "Dad," Evan said, his voice devoid of life. It's getting too intense." I stared at him, the realization hitting me harder than the slap. She did it herself. The fog in my brain cleared instantly. The shock evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of my profession. I looked at the scene again, but this time, I didn't see a family dinner gone wrong. I saw a crime scene. I saw the way the plate had fallen, forward, not backward as it would if I had pulled it. I saw the perfectly timed invitation. I saw the audience Marla had ensured would be present, witnesses from the community to validate her victimhood. I saw the trembling hands of a brother who had been coerced into silence before the first course was even served. This was not an emotional outburst. This was not an accident. This was a launch. Marla had sacrificed a piece of history, something worth thousands of dollars and sentimental infinity, just to create a narrative. She had destroyed the plate to destroy my credibility. The slap was not a reaction. It was punctuation. She wanted me to hit back. She wanted me to scream. She needed the monster she had been painting me as for 13 years to finally manifest in the flesh. I touched my cheek. It was throbbing, likely already bruising. Good. That was evidence. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give her the satisfaction of the reaction she had scripted for me. I straightened my spine, smoothing the fabric of my blazer. I looked at Marla, who was peeking through her fingers to gauge my reaction. When she met my gaze, she paused. She expected fire. Instead, she got ice. "Goodbye, Dad," I said quietly. I turned on my heel, the crunch of porcelain loud under the sole of my boot. It was the sound of a bridge burning, but also the sound of a battle beginning. I walked out of the dining room, through the potpourri-scented hall, and out into the cool night air. As I walked to my car, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a dark, churning resolve. Marla thought she had won a skirmish tonight. She thought breaking a plate and bruising a cheek would send me running back to the city, cowed and shamed. She didn't understand who she was dealing with. She saw a stepdaughter. She forgot she was looking at a risk architect. She had made the first move. She had set the trap. But as I started the engine and looked back at the glowing windows of the house that was no longer a home, I knew one thing for certain. The plate was just the beginning. Marla had started a war, but she had made a critical error in her calculations. She assumed I would play by the rules of family. She didn't realize that from this moment on, I was treating this like a hostile takeover. She did it herself. I repeated Evan's whisper as I shifted the car into drive. Those 4 words were not just a confession. They were the key to the entire algorithm. And I was going to use them to bring the whole house down. The silence in my car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt and the pounding of my own heart. I reached up and touched my cheek again. It was tender to the touch, radiating a dull heat that seemed to seep inward, past the skin and bone, settling deep into the marrow of my memory. The physical pain was manageable. I had a high tolerance for pain. It was the familiarity of the sensation that made me nauseous. It was the feeling of history repeating itself, a loop I thought I had broken out of when I left for college. Driving away from Ridgewood Hills, I did not just see the dark suburban road ahead of me. I saw the past. I saw the architecture of a takeover. In my line of work, we talk about hostile takeovers in corporate terms. Stock buyouts, board manipulations, proxy wars, but the most brutal takeovers happen in living rooms, over roast chicken and forced smiles, where the currency is not money but affection, and the boardroom is a dinner table where the seats are slowly, methodically reassigned. I let my mind drift back 13 years. I was 16 years old. My mother had been gone for 2 years, leaving behind a silence in our house that felt as vast and echoey as a cathedral. My father, Ray, was a man adrift. He was a good man, soft-hearted and conflict-averse, the kind of man who needed a rudder. When he met Marla at a resort in Arizona where she was the guest services manager, he thought he had found an anchor. I remember the first time she walked into our house. She was radiant. She brought with her a whirlwind of energy and organization that our grieving household desperately lacked. She did not try to replace my mother immediately. She was smarter than that. She played the long game. She brought fresh flowers to my mother's grave. Standing respectfully a few feet behind us, head bowed, she cooked my mother's recipes, asking me to taste the sauce to make sure she had gotten the basil ratio right. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me, with eyes that seemed to shimmer with sincerity, that she never wanted to be a replacement. She just wanted to be a second source of light. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I was 16, motherless, and desperate for feminine softness in a world that had turned hard and cold. But then, the temperature began to change. It was not a sudden freeze. It was a slow, imperceptible drop, degree by degree, until you woke up one morning and realized you were shivering, and you could not remember when the window had been left open. The shift began with the house. Marla had an eye for design. a professional slickness honed in hotel lobbies. Slowly, the cozy, cluttered warmth of my childhood began to vanish. The overstuffed armchair where my mother used to read was moved to the basement because the upholstery was tired. It was replaced by a beige, stiff-backed accent chair that looked beautiful, but was impossible to sit in. The family photos that lined the hallway, dozens of candid, messy shots of us laughing, of Mom with flour on her face, were taken down to be reframed. When they returned, half of them were missing. The ones that remained were the posed, formal portraits where we all looked perfect and stiff. The messy joy of our past was curated out of existence. "We want to look forward, Lena," Marla would say when I asked where the photo of Mom at the beach had gone. "Living in a shrine isn't healthy for your father. We need to help him heal." It was always about helping Dad. That was her shield. Any objection I raised was framed as me hindering his recovery. Then came the divide between Evan and me. Evan was 11 then, still soft and malleable, desperate for a mother figure. Marla poured affection on him like syrup. She bought him the latest gaming consoles, the expensive sneakers, the brand-name hoodies. She sat with him for hours helping him with his history homework, praising his brilliance. For Evan, she was a fairy godmother. For me, she was a critic disguised as a concerned parent. "Lena, are you sure you want to wear that?" she would ask, her voice low so Dad wouldn't hear. "It draws attention to your hips. I'm just looking out for you. Boys talk, you know." Or, "You are so intense lately. You really need to learn to control your emotions. You are just like your mother in that way, always so much." That was her favorite weapon, my mother. She figured out quickly that comparing me to her was the double-edged sword that cut deepest. If I laughed too loud, I was manic like your mother. If I argued, I was unstable like your mother. She took the memory of the woman I loved most and twisted it into a pathology. She turned my inheritance into a diagnosis. My father, desperate for the peace Marla promised, began to absorb her narrative. He didn't do it maliciously. He did it out of exhaustion. He would come home from work, tired and gray, and Marla would meet him at the door with a scotch and a sigh, whispering about how difficult I had been that day, how I had snapped at her, how I had slammed a door. "Lena," Dad would say at dinner, looking at me with weary disappointment, "Marla says you were aggressive today. Why can't you just try to get along? She is doing so much for us." "I wasn't aggressive," I would protest, my voice rising in frustration. "She threw away my art project. She said it was clutter." "See," Marla would whisper, touching Dad's arm gently. "See how she yells? It is exactly what I was telling you. Ray, she goes from 0 to 60 in a second. It scares me sometimes." And there it was. The seed was planted. Lena is volatile. Lena is dangerous. Lena is the problem. Evan, seeing which way the wind was blowing, aligned himself with the power. He stopped coming to my room to play video games. He started rolling his eyes when I spoke. When Marla would criticize me at the dinner table, Evan would nod and say, "Yeah, Lena, why do you have to be so dramatic all the time?" He was a child being fed sugar to keep him sweet, and he didn't realize the sugar was poisoning his loyalty to his sister. The breaking point, the prequel to the shattered plate tonight, happened on a Tuesday night when I was 17. It was over something trivial, a ceramic mug left on the counter. I had come into the kitchen to get water. Marla was there, reorganizing the spice rack for the 10th time. She saw the mug I had left drying by the sink. It was a chipped blue mug that had been my favorite. "I told you not to leave clutter on the counters," she said, her voice sharp. She swept her hand out, not to pick up the mug, but to shove it. It slid across the granite and smashed onto the tile floor. "Clean it up," she ordered, turning her back to me. "You knocked it over," I said, staring at the shards of blue ceramic. "You did that on purpose." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "You left it there. It was precarious. You are so careless. Lena." "I am not cleaning up your mess," I said, the anger rising in my chest like bile. I turned to walk out of the kitchen. That was when she moved. She moved faster than I expected. She grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging into the soft skin of my forearm. It wasn't a gentle hold. It was a vice grip. "Don't you walk away from me when I'm speaking to you," she hissed, her face inches from mine. The mask of the sweet stepmother was gone, replaced by a look of pure, cold malice. "Let go of me!" I shouted. Panicked, I yanked my arm back. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to free myself from the pain of her nails. I pulled hard. Marla let go at the exact moment I pulled, causing me to stumble back into the refrigerator, but she didn't just let go. She threw herself backward, colliding with the kitchen island. "Ray!" she screamed. "Ray, help!" My father came running down the stairs, his face pale. He found me standing by the fridge, clutching my throbbing wrist, and Marla slumped against the island, holding her arm, tears already streaming down her face. "What happened?" Dad yelled. "She attacked me," Marla sobbed, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "I asked her to clean up a broken cup, and she snapped. Ray, she grabbed my arm and shoved me. Look." She held out her arm. There was a faint red mark where she had hit the island, or maybe where she had pinched herself. I couldn't tell. "I didn't touch her," I screamed, holding out my own wrist where 4 crescent moon indents were turning purple. "She grabbed me. Look at my arm." Dad looked at Marla, weeping and small. Then he looked at me, tall, angry, and shouting. He didn't look at my wrist. He didn't look at the evidence. He looked at the optics. "Lena, go to your room," he said, his voice shaking. "Dad, look at my wrist," I pleaded. "I said go to your room," he roared. It was the first time my father had ever raised his voice at me like that. "I cannot have violence in this house. I won't tolerate it." I ran upstairs, slammed my door, and slid down to the floor, sobbing. I waited for him to come up. I waited for him to come ask for my side of the story. I waited for him to be the father who used to check under my bed for monsters. He never came. Later that night, I heard them talking downstairs. Marla's voice was low and soothing, weaving the narrative. She was telling him that I needed help, that I was out of control, that she was scared for her safety, and for Evan's safety. The next morning, nothing was said. The blue mug was gone, swept away into the trash. My wrist was bruised, but I wore long sleeves. Dad wouldn't look me in the eye. When I tried to bring it up, he held up a hand and said, "We are moving on, Lena. For the sake of peace, just try to be gentler." Gentler, as if I were the storm and she were the flower, when in reality, she was the drought that was killing everything in the garden. That was the moment I learned the most important lesson of my life in that house. I stood in the kitchen the next day, looking at the spot where the blue mug had shattered. I realized that truth was not an objective fact in the Cartwright household. Truth was a product. It was manufactured by the person with the loudest tears and the most consistent story. Marla had realized something I hadn't. Ray didn't want the truth. The truth was messy. The truth would require him to admit he had married a manipulator. The truth would require him to choose his daughter over his wife. Ray wanted peace, and Marla gave him peace. As long as I was the villain, if I was the problem, then the solution was simple. Fix Lena, or remove Lena. I stopped fighting back that summer. I stopped arguing. I became a ghost in my own home, counting the days until I could leave for college. But Marla didn't stop. She kept cataloging my failures, my outbursts, keeping a mental ledger that she could pull out whenever she needed leverage. Driving through the dark streets of Ridgewood Hills, 12 years after that blue mug shattered, I realized the plate tonight was the graduation ceremony of that long education. The blue mug had been a test run, a prototype. The plate was the final exam. But she had made a mistake. She thought I was still the 17-year-old girl who would run to her room and cry, waiting for a father who would never come. She didn't realize that I had spent the last decade building a career on analyzing systems of failure. I wasn't going to cry in my room this time. I glanced at the passenger seat where my laptop bag sat. Inside was my computer, my tool, my weapon. "You want to write a story, Marla?" I whispered to the empty car, my voice hard. "Fine. Let's see how your story holds up against the forensic audit of a decade of lies." I merged onto the highway, the city lights twinkling in the distance like a galaxy of cold, hard data. I was done being the character in her tragedy. It was time to become the author of her exposure. The ghost of the blue mug and the dust of the grandmother's plate were about to become the foundation of my case. And unlike my father, the court of law and the court of public opinion would require more than just tears to be convinced. The past was a trap she had set, but the future was a system I was going to design, and in my design, there was no room for her lies. To the outside world, my life looks like a perfectly balanced equation. I live on the 42nd floor of a glass and steel tower in downtown Seattle, in a one-bedroom apartment that costs more per month than most people earn in 3. My furniture is Italian, minimalist, and sharp-edged. My view is a sweeping panorama of the Puget Sound, a vast expanse of gray water that never asks me for anything. At Lumisphere Stratagem Labs, where I work as a senior risk architect, my colleagues look at my tailored suits and my calm, unshakable demeanor, and they write a backstory for me that fits their prejudices. They see the Ridgewood Hills address on my emergency contact forms, and they assume I am a product of generational wealth. They assume my college tuition was paid by a trust fund, and that my confident negotiation style comes from a lifetime of having a safety net. "Must be nice," a junior analyst whispered once near the coffee machine, thinking I was out of earshot. "She walks around like she owns the place because her daddy probably owns half the city." I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him that the only thing my father owns is a mounting pile of regret and a house that is technically owned by the bank. I didn't tell him that my safety net was a series of 3 part-time jobs, academic scholarships that required a 4.0 GPA, and a caffeine addiction that started at 19, just to keep my eyes open during night shifts at a data entry firm. I built this life brick by brick, using anxiety as mortar. But while I was busy building my fortress, I didn't realize I was also funding the siege against it. For the last 7 years, I have been the silent artery pumping financial lifeblood into the dying organism that is the Cartwright household. It started small. A few $100s here for a car repair Dad couldn't cover. $500 there for Evan's unexpected textbooks. But like any untreated infection, it spread. The Ridgewood Hills house, with its manicured lawn and the newly painted shutters that Marla insisted on, was a lie. It was a stage set constructed over a sinkhole of debt. My father, Ray, had retired from his mid-level management job 2 years ago, but Marla refused to downsize. It would kill him to leave his memories, she had told me, eyes wide with faux concern. In reality, it would kill her social standing to leave the zip code. So, I paid. I created a spreadsheet on my secure personal server. I named it The Sinking Ship. It was a habit from work, visualizing the risk. Column A was my income. Column B was my living expenses. Column C was labeled guilt tax. The entries in column C were staggering. January, $1,200. Reason? Dad's dental surgery. Later, I saw photos on Facebook of Marla wearing a new designer coat that cost exactly $1,200, while Dad complained his tooth still hurt. March, $3,000. Reason? Emergency roof repair after a storm. I drove by a week later. The roof looked the same, but the guest bathroom had been retiled with Italian marble. June, $800. Reason? Evan's networking trip to Silicon Valley for his startup. His Instagram showed him partying in Vegas. Every time I tried to close the valve, Marla would execute a perfect pivot. She wouldn't get angry. That was too crude. She would get sad. She would call me in the middle of a workday, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Oh, Lena, I didn't want to ask," she would say. "I know you are so busy with your big important job. You probably don't have time to worry about us. It is just, Your father is so stressed. His blood pressure is up again. I'm just trying to keep a roof over his head so he doesn't have a stroke. But if you can't help, I understand. We will just figure it out. Maybe I can sell some of my jewelry, or your mother's old china." That was the hook. Always the subtle threat to erase more of my mother, or the implication that my refusal would physically harm my father. "I'll transfer the money, Marla," I would say, hating myself. "You are a saint, Lena," she would coo, the sadness evaporating instantly. "I don't know what we would do without you, although, really, with what you make, it is just a drop in the bucket, isn't it?" And then there was Evan. My brother, the entrepreneur. Evan was 24, charming, and completely allergic to traditional employment. He had convinced himself, and Marla, that he was one genius idea away from being the next tech billionaire. He didn't need a job. He needed seed capital. My phone would light up with texts that were masterpieces of delusion. "Hey sis, huge news. Met a guy who knows a guy at Google. We are building an app that disrupts the pet sitting industry. Just need $1,500 for the server costs and LLC registration. This is the one. I promise. When we launch, I'm paying you back with 10% interest. You're investing in the future." I was not investing in the future. I was paying for his lifestyle of craft beers, limited edition sneakers, and the illusion that he was a CEO rather than an unemployed adult living in his childhood bedroom. I kept a running total. Over the last 5 years, I had transferred nearly $65,000 to my family. $65,000. That was a down payment on a house. That was a master's degree. That was my freedom. But to them, I was just the cold, unfeeling banker, the one who loved money more than people. The irony was acidic enough to burn a hole through my stomach lining. I was the one eating store-brand pasta for 3 years to save up my emergency fund, while Marla was hosting catered garden parties in Ridgewood Hills on my dime. I was the one working 80-hour weeks, while Evan slept until noon and brainstormed. But the breaking point, the event that turned the broken plate from a random accident into a tactical nuclear strike, happened exactly 4 hours before that dinner. I was in my office at Lumisphere, staring at a complex fraud model for a banking client, when my phone rang. It was Marla. I let it go to voicemail. I was in the middle of a breakthrough. It rang again immediately, then a text. "Emergency. Dad. Call now." My heart hammered against my ribs. That was the trigger word. I stepped out of the meeting room and dialed her number, my hands shaking slightly. "Is he okay? Is it a heart attack?" I asked the moment she picked up. "He is fine. Lena, calm down," Marla said. Her voice was breezy, completely at odds with the text. "Physically, he is fine, but financially, we are in a bit of a bind." I leaned against the cold glass of the window, watching the traffic crawl 40 stories below. "You said it was an emergency, Marla." "It is, for his peace of mind," she said. "Look, darling, I will get straight to the point. We found a way to consolidate some of the bills. The interest rates are killing us. There is a wonderful line of credit available, very low interest, that would let your father retire completely without worrying about the mortgage payments for the next 5 years. It is a godsend." "Okay," I said, suspicious. "So take it." "Well, that is the thing," she laughed, a nervous tinkling sound. "Because Dad is retired, and my income is variable. The bank is being a little sticky about the paperwork. They just need a co-signer, someone with a strong credit history and a steady income, just to reassure the algorithm." I closed my eyes. A co-signer. In my line of work, co-signer is synonymous with victim. It meant putting my name, my credit score, and my financial future on the line for their debt. If they missed a payment, and they would miss a payment, the bank wouldn't call Marla. They would come for me. They would garnish my wages. They would destroy the pristine credit rating I had spent a decade polishing. "No," I said. The silence on the other end was deafening. "Excuse me?" Marla asked, her voice dropping an octave. I said no. "Marla, I can't co-sign a line of credit. I have given you money. I have paid bills. but I cannot put my name on a loan for you. That is a boundary I won't cross." "It is not for me, Lena," she snapped. "It is for your father. Do you want him to go back to work at 68? Do you want him greeting customers at Walmart because his daughter was too selfish to sign a piece of paper?" "Dad has a pension and Social Security and the money I send," I countered, keeping my voice level. "If you cut back on the expenses, he would be fine. You don't need a loan, you need a budget." "How dare you?" she whispered. It was a theatrical whisper, heavy with venom. "You sit there in your ivory tower, judging us. You have no idea what it costs to maintain a life in this community. We have a reputation to uphold. Lena, we can't live like paupers just because you are stingy." "I am not stingy. I am responsible, and the answer is no." "Your mother would be ashamed of you," Marla said. She deployed the nuclear option without hesitation. "She wanted this house for your father. She wanted him to be happy. And here you are, hoarding your money, spitting on her memory." "Don't you talk about her," I said, my grip on the phone tightening so hard the plastic creaked. "Do not bring her into this." "Then sign the papers, Lena. Bring them to dinner tonight. We can celebrate your promotion by securing your father's future. It is the least you can do after everything we have done for you." "I am not signing. Marla, I will see you at dinner. Do not ask me again." I hung up. My hands were trembling. I stood there for 5 minutes, breathing deeply, recalibrating my emotional shields. I told myself it was just another tantrum. I told myself she would get over it. I was wrong. I didn't realize it then, but that no was the declaration of war. When I drove to Ridgewood Hills 4 hours later, I thought I was walking into a tense meal. I didn't know I was walking into an ambush. Marla didn't want the loan anymore. If she couldn't use my credit to fund her lifestyle, she was going to destroy my reputation to ensure I couldn't leave. She needed a new narrative. If I wasn't the generous benefactor, she would turn me into the unstable threat. As I sat at that dining table, watching her fingers dance around the rim of the heirloom plate, I should have known. She wasn't nervous. She was anticipating the climax of her script. She knew I had refused the money. She knew she had lost her financial leverage, so she decided to switch to legal leverage. The plate didn't just fall. It was pushed by the hand of a woman who had been told no for the first time in years. And as I stood in the parking lot of the courthouse in the present day, watching the police lights reflect off the wet pavement, I thought about that spreadsheet on my secure server. Column C, guilt tax. It was time to close that account. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I navigated to the standing order titled Ridgewood Support, $2,000, scheduled to transfer on the 1st of the month. Delete. I went to the supplementary credit card I had given Evan for emergencies. Cancel card. Reason, theft. I went to the shared family plan for our cell phones. Remove line. Ray Cartwright. Remove line. Marla Cartwright. Remove line. Evan Cartwright. I felt a lightness spread through my chest, a physical sensation of weight being lifted. They had called me cold. They had called me a calculator. They had accused me of caring only about numbers. Fine. If they wanted the risk architect, they were going to get the risk architect. I was cutting my losses. I was liquidating the bad assets. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan, probably sent from the bathroom of the courthouse while Marla was being questioned. "Lee, please, I am sorry. Mom is going crazy. She says you cut us off. What are we supposed to do?" I looked at the message. I thought about him whispering, "She did it herself," only when he was backed into a corner, only when his own neck was on the line. I thought about the thousands of dollars wasted on his dreams while I worked myself to the bone. I typed a reply. "You are an entrepreneur. Evan, figure it out." I blocked the number. Then I got into my car and drove back toward the city, toward the glass tower, toward the life I had built alone. The guilt tax had been repealed, and for the first time in my life, the balance sheet was finally, truly in my favor. But the war wasn't over. Marla was down. But people like her don't stay down. They just change tactics. And I had one more asset of theirs I needed to investigate: the trust fund. The document Marla had waved in my face, the one that was supposed to protect Dad but was actually designed to imprison him. I needed to see the original, and I knew exactly which crooked notary Marla used for her business. The engine roared to life. Phase 1. Defense was complete. Phase 2. Asset recovery was about to begin. The shattered remnants of the heirloom plate still lay on the floor like jagged teeth when Marla fled the room. She did not just leave. She staged an exit. She threw her hands over her mouth, stifling a sob that sounded suspiciously like a hiccup, and rushed toward the master bedroom, the heels of her shoes clicking a frantic rhythm against the hardwood. "Marla, honey," my father called out, his voice cracking. He took a half-step toward her retreating figure, then stopped and turned to me. The look on his face was one I had seen 1,000 times before, but tonight, under the harsh light of the chandelier, it looked more pathetic than ever. It was a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and a desperate, pleading need for the path of least resistance. "Lena," he said, his voice low and trembling, "look what you have done." "I didn't do anything, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I didn't touch the plate. I didn't touch her." "Stop it," he hissed, glancing nervously toward the Hendersons, who were hurriedly gathering their coats, eager to escape the blast radius of our family dysfunction. "Just stop lying. I saw the plate fall. I saw her face. Why do you always have to make everything a battle? Why can't you just control yourself?" "Control myself?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. "Dad, she staged this. Evan knows it. Ask him." I pointed at Evan, but my brother had already retreated to the living room, burying his face in his phone, refusing to make eye contact. He had delivered his whisper. She did it herself, and then immediately retreated back into the safety of neutrality. He wasn't going to save me. He was just giving me the code to decrypt the disaster. "I don't want to hear it," Ray said, rubbing his temples. "I can't take the stress. Lena, my blood pressure is already through the roof. Just, please, go knock on the bedroom door. Tell her you are sorry. Tell her it was an accident and you didn't mean to scare her. Just fix it so we can have some peace." "I am not apologizing for something I didn't do," I said, picking up my purse. "And I am certainly not apologizing to a woman who just slapped me across the face." "She was frightened," Ray argued, his face flushing red. "She felt threatened. You are taller than her. Lena, you have that look in your eyes, just like your mother used to get, intense, scary." There it was again, the ghost of my mother, weaponized to justify Marla's violence. "I am leaving, Dad," I said, coldness settling over me like a shroud. "Do not call me until you are ready to hear the truth." I turned and walked toward the front door. As I passed the hallway leading to the master bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear Marla's voice. She wasn't sobbing anymore. Her voice was low, rapid, and terrifyingly composed. "Yes, I understand," she was saying. "I just want to know what the timeline is for a temporary restraining order. If I file tomorrow morning, how soon does it go into effect? I am terrified she will come back. She is unstable." I froze. My hand hovered over the doorknob. "A restraining order? For a broken plate?" "No, I have witnesses," she continued, her tone shifting to one of fragile victimhood. "My husband saw the aggression, and we had neighbors over. Yes, thank you. I will come to the clerk's office first thing." I walked out of the house, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. The night air was cool, but I was burning up. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a legal strategy. I drove back to the city in a daze, my mind racing. I tried to analyze the risk profile. Why escalate to a restraining order? A restraining order creates a public record. It creates a paper trail of instability. The answer came the next morning, at 10 o'clock, while I was sitting at my desk at Lumisphere. My phone rang. It was a blocked number. "This is Lena Cartwright," I answered, switching into my professional voice. "Ms. Cartwright, This is Sarah Jenkins from the Department of Social Services, Adult Protective Services Division. A woman's voice said. It was calm, bureaucratic, and instantly chilling. I stopped typing. Excuse me? We received an anonymous referral regarding the welfare of your father, Raymond Cartwright, the woman said. The report alleges that there have been incidents of intimidation, emotional abuse, and potential physical threats directed at him by a family member, specifically, you. I felt the blood drain from my face. That is ridiculous. I pay his medical bills. I manage his health care. The report suggests that financial control is being used as a lever for emotional coercion, the caseworker said, and that there was a violent altercation at the residence last night involving property damage. We are required to investigate all claims involving vulnerable seniors. My father is not vulnerable, I said, my voice rising. He is 68, not 90, and I did not threaten him. We will need to schedule a home visit and an interview, Ms. Cartwright. Until then, we advise you to limit contact to avoid exacerbating the situation. I hung up the phone and stared at the black screen. My hands were shaking. It was a pincer movement. Marla wasn't just trying to get me out of the house. She was trying to get me out of the legal picture entirely, by labeling me a threat to my father. She was setting the stage to invalidate my standing as his daughter. If I was an abuser, I couldn't make medical decisions. I couldn't challenge financial changes. I would be erased. I needed to get to Dad. I needed to speak to him alone, away from her poison, and explain what was happening. He was weak, but he wasn't evil. If he knew she was calling Adult Protective Services on me, surely that would be the line too far. I waited 2 days. I knew Marla had a standing hair appointment on Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock. It was the only window I had. I drove to Ridgewood Hills, parking my car a block away just in case. I walked to the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. I used my key to open the front door. Dad? I called out. In the living room. His voice came back. He sounded tired. I walked in, ready to plead my case, ready to show him the spreadsheet of all the money I had sent, ready to beg him to open his eyes. But when I entered the living room, he wasn't alone. Marla was sitting in the wingback chair, the stiff beige one that replaced my mother's armchair. She was not at the hairdresser. She was waiting for me. On the coffee table between them sat a neat stack of documents. Hello. Lena, Marla said. She wasn't crying today. She looked calm, almost serene, like a surgeon preparing to cut. We were hoping you would stop by. We need to have a family meeting. I looked at Ray. He was sitting on the sofa, his head in his hands. He couldn't even look at me. You called Adult Protective Services on me, I said, my voice shaking with rage. I did no such thing, Marla said smoothly. But neighbors talk. Lena, people saw you storm out. People heard the screaming. The community is concerned. And frankly, so are we. What is this? I asked, pointing at the papers. This, Marla said, gesturing for me to sit, is a way forward, a way to keep us all safe, and to make sure you don't have to worry about these misunderstandings anymore. I didn't sit. I stepped forward and looked at the documents. My risk architect eyes scanned the headers. Durable power of attorney. Last will and testament. Amended. Family Code of Conduct and Behavioral Agreement. What is a behavioral agreement? I asked, picking up the top sheet. It is just a promise, Marla said, her voice sickeningly sweet. It says that when you visit, you agree not to raise your voice. You agree not to damage property. You agree to respect the boundaries of the homeowners. It is standard. Really, if you can't control your temper, this just gives us a mechanism to ask you to leave without calling the police. It protects everyone, especially you. I read the text. It was humiliating. It was written like a contract for a delinquent teenager, not a 29-year-old professional. The undersigned agrees to abstain from aggressive posturing. The undersigned agrees to submit to a bag check upon entry if requested. But then I saw the reference to the other documents. I picked up the power of attorney draft. It was thick. I flipped to the clauses on the third page. In the event that Raymond Cartwright is deemed incapacitated, or in the event that his primary residence is deemed an environment of conflict necessitating protective measures, the primary agent, Marla Cartwright, assumes full and immediate control of all assets, real estate, and financial instruments to secure the safety of the principal. I looked at the will. Article 4. Disinheritance Clause. In the event that any beneficiary is found to have engaged in conduct detrimental to the physical or emotional well-being of the testator or his spouse, as documented by legal filings or protective agency reports, their share of the estate shall be forfeited and transferred to the surviving spouse. The room spun. It was a trap within a trap. If I signed the behavioral agreement, I was admitting that my behavior needed regulating. I was creating the evidence of my own instability. If I didn't sign, I was being uncooperative and threatening, which would justify the restraining order she was already preparing. And the power of attorney, the clause about environment of conflict, was the trigger. All she had to do was stage one more fight, break one more plate, claim I yelled at her, and she could declare the house a conflict zone. That would trigger the clause, giving her immediate control over everything, the house, the pension, the accounts, while Dad was still alive. She wasn't waiting for him to die. She was staging a coup while he was sitting right there. "Dad," I said, holding up the paper, "do you know what this says? It says she can take control of your money if she decides I'm stressing you out. It says she can cut me out of the will if she files a report against me." Ray looked up, his eyes watery and confused. Marla explained it. "Lena, it is just legal boilerplate. It is to protect the assets so we don't have to worry about the banks if something happens. She is just trying to help. She is worried about you." "She is stealing the house, Dad," I shouted. "Don't yell," Marla snapped, her voice cutting like a whip. "See? Ray? See? She is doing it again. She comes in here and starts screaming about money. That is all she cares about." Marla stood up and walked over to me. She stood close, just like she had on the night of the plate, but this time, there was no audience. There was just the cold, hard truth. "Sign the papers, Lena," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "If you are a good daughter, if you are safe, then you have nothing to worry about. Only a dangerous person would be afraid to promise not to be violent." "I am not signing this," I said, throwing the papers back onto the table. "I am not signing a confession for a crime I didn't commit, and I am not handing you the deed to my mother's house." Marla smiled. It was a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then you are making a choice," she said, loud enough for Ray to hear. "You are choosing your inheritance over your father's peace of mind. You are choosing money over family." "I am choosing truth," I said. "Truth is whatever the judge believes. Lena," she murmured. "And right now, the judge has a police report, a social services referral, and a witness statement from your brother. What do you have? A spreadsheet?" I looked at my father. "Dad, please, look at the dates. Look at the clauses. She drafted this the same week she asked me to co-sign that loan. Don't you see the pattern?" Ray closed his eyes and turned his head away. "Just go, Lena. If you aren't going to sign, just go. I can't take the fighting." He was choosing her. He was choosing the lie because the lie was comfortable, and the truth was too painful to bear. I looked at Marla. She was victorious. She knew she had won this round. She had weaponized my competence against me. She knew I would read the fine print, and she knew I would refuse to sign. My refusal was exactly what she needed. Now she could tell Ray. "See? She refused to promise to be nonviolent. She must be planning something." "Get out," Marla said, pointing to the door, "and don't come back until you are ready to behave." I walked out of the house, my legs feeling like lead. I got into my car and locked the doors, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I grabbed my notebook from the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. I forced myself to write. Incident 1. The plate. Objective: establish history of violence. Incident 2. The social services call. Objective: establish record of elder endangerment. Incident 3. The behavioral contract. Objective: trigger refusal. Proving uncooperativeness. Goal: activation of conflict clause in power of attorney. Seizure of all assets. I looked at the house one last time. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a hostile entity. Marla thought she was a genius. She thought she had cornered me. She thought that by framing me as the dangerous daughter, she had neutralized me. But she had made a critical error. In her arrogance, she had shown me the blueprint. She had handed me the power of attorney and let me read the trigger clause. She had told me exactly how she planned to steal the estate. She was building a case based on character defamation. I needed to build a case based on forensic accounting. I started the engine. The panic was receding, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I wasn't going to argue with my father anymore. I wasn't going to try to win his love. That currency was devalued. I was going to treat this exactly like what it was: a complex fraud scheme involving a vulnerable victim and a sophisticated bad actor. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Alicia," I said when the line connected. "It's Lena. I know you are busy suing Big Pharma, but I need a favor. I need you to look at a trust fund document, and I need you to tell me exactly how to dismantle a durable power of attorney based on coercion." Marla wanted a villain? Fine, I would be the villain. But I would be the kind of villain who brought receipts. The plate was just the opening ceremony. The games had just begun. I sat at my desk in the center of my apartment, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the dark room like a cockpit. The city of Seattle slept outside my window, a grid of lights that usually brought me peace. But tonight, the only grid I cared about was the one forming on my screen. I was done crying. I was done pleading. I had spent my entire adult life trying to solve my family's problems with emotion and generosity, and all it had gotten me was a bruised cheek and a threat of disinheritance. It was time to do what I did best. I was a risk architect. I dismantled complex systems of fraud for a living. I tracked how millions of dollars vanished through shell companies and bad code. If Marla wanted to treat our family like a business arrangement, I would audit her like one. I created a new encrypted folder on my desktop. I did not name it Dad or Family or Legal. I typed 4 capital letters: HOME. I started with the liquidity analysis. I logged into my own banking history, exporting 10 years of data into a master spreadsheet. I filtered for every transfer sent to Ray Cartwright, Marla Cartwright, or Evan Cartwright. I filtered for every bill payment made to third-party vendors for services at the Ridgewood Hills address. The total at the bottom of the column made my stomach turn. It was not just the $65,000 I had estimated in my head when I accounted for the small $20 transfers for Evan's lunch, the Amazon orders for household supplies I had covered, and the emergency HVAC repair I had paid for directly to the contractor 3 years ago. The number was closer to $82,000. $82,000. I had effectively bought a significant stake in a company that was now trying to fire me. Next, I moved to the liabilities. I knew Dad had credit card debt. Marla always complained about it, but I needed to see the granular data. I still had the login credentials for Dad's primary Chase account because I had set up the auto pay for him 5 years ago after he missed a payment while hospitalized for pneumonia. I logged in. The 2-factor authentication code went to his email. I knew his password for that, too. It was my mother's birthday. Marla had never bothered to change it. I accessed the account and downloaded the last 24 months of statements. Then I opened the county clerk's public records database for real estate. What I found there made the blood freeze in my veins. I had assumed the house was still in my father's name, perhaps with a home equity line of credit attached. But the deed history showed a transaction dated just 6 months ago. The property had been quit-claimed from Raymond Cartwright to a legal entity listed as the Ridgewood Care Trust. I pulled the registration documents for the trust. Trustee: Marla Cartwright. Successor trustee: Evan Cartwright. Beneficiary: Raymond Cartwright. It looked standard on the surface: a way to protect assets from probate. But then I read the fine print of the trust's bylaws, which had been filed as an addendum. Section 7, Paragraph C, Preservation of Domestic Tranquility. The legalese was dense, but my eyes cut through it. It stated that the trustee, Marla, had the unilateral authority to restrict access to the property and suspend beneficiary privileges for any individual deemed to be a source of undue stress, emotional volatility, or physical threat to the primary beneficiary. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the breath hissing out of my lungs. It was a trap. It was a perfectly constructed legal bear trap. The language in the trust mirrored the language in the behavioral agreement she had tried to make me sign. If I had signed that paper, I would have legally acknowledged that I was a source of volatility. If I violated the agreement, say by being accused of breaking a plate, Marla could legally use the trust's bylaws to bar me from the property and, more importantly, revoke any claim I had to the estate. She wasn't just trying to keep me away from Dad. She was building a legal fortress where she was the warden, and he was the prisoner. I checked the dates. The trust had been amended with that specific domestic tranquility clause exactly 14 days before the dinner party. 14 days before she called me begging for a loan co-signature. The timeline was damning. Plan A had been to get me to co-sign a loan, trapping me financially. When I refused the loan on the phone, she immediately pivoted to Plan B, the trust and the dangerous daughter narrative. She needed a reason to trigger the clause. She needed an incident. So she broke the plate. I turned back to the credit card statements. If the real estate fraud was the skeleton, the spending was the meat. I ran a pivot table on the expenses. Marla claimed they were drowning in debt because of medical bills and inflation. I looked at the merchant categories. Sephora, $400. Nordstrom, $650. Ridgewood Day. Spa, $300. Recurring monthly. Lux Home Interiors, $2,000. There were charges for consulting services paid to a generic LLC that I didn't recognize. I ran a background check on the LLC. It was registered to a residential address in a neighboring town, the home of Marla's sister. She was siphoning cash out of Dad's credit line and funneling it to her family under the guise of a service fee. Then I saw the authorized user activity. Evan, my brother, the struggling entrepreneur, had a card in his name linked to Dad's account. Marla had told me she gave it to him for gas and groceries. I scrolled through Evan's transaction history. Coinbase, $500. DraftKings, $200. DraftKings, $200. Binance, $1,000. FanDuel, $300. He wasn't buying groceries. He was gambling. He was pouring my father's retirement savings into crypto exchanges and sports betting apps, chasing a fast fortune that never came, and every time he lost. Marla covered it up, likely telling Dad the high bills were due to rising utility costs or my stinginess. I looked at a charge from 3 months ago. Prestige Business Seminars, Las Vegas, $3,000. That was the networking trip I had sent him $800 for. He had double-dipped. He took money from me and then charged the ticket to Dad anyway. I felt a cold, hard knot of fury tighten in my chest. It wasn't the money that angered me most. It was the betrayal. I had spent nights awake worrying about Evan's future. I had defended him. I had believed him when he said he just needed a break. He wasn't a victim. He was an accomplice. He was being bought. Marla let him bleed the accounts dry, and in exchange, he backed her up when she needed a witness against me. His silence about the broken plate wasn't just cowardice, it was a transaction. He was protecting his line of credit. I compiled everything: the trust deed, the domestic tranquility clause, the timeline of the loan refusal and the dinner, the spreadsheet of my contributions, the visualization of Marla's luxury spending versus Dad's medical costs, the itemized list of Evan's gambling losses. I turned it into a single encrypted PDF file. Then I opened my contact list and found Alicia Byrne. Alicia and I had gone to college together. While I went into risk management, She went into law. She was now a partner at a boutique firm that specialized in consumer protection and elder law. She was the kind of lawyer who ate corporate bullies for breakfast. I sent the file, then I called her. "It is 11:30 at night. Lena," Alicia answered, her voice husky with sleep. "You know I bill double for after hours." "I sent you a file," I said. "I need you to open it, now." "Is this about work? Did Lumisphere find a mole?" "No, it is about my father." I heard the rustle of sheets, then the click of a bedside lamp. "Give me a minute." I waited in the silence, listening to the sound of her typing. I heard the notification chime as the file opened. Then, for a long time, there was only the sound of her breathing and the occasional click of a mouse. "Okay," Alicia said after 5 minutes. Her voice had changed. The sleep was gone, replaced by the sharp metallic edge of professional focus. "I am looking at the trust documents and the credit statements." "Tell me what you see," I said. "If this landed on your desk from a stranger, what would you call it?" "I would call it a textbook case of elder financial exploitation," Alicia said without hesitation. "The asset transfer to the trust is classic. She moved the house out of his direct control so that if you tried to intervene or seek guardianship, the asset is already shielded. The domestic tranquility clause is a poison pill. It is designed specifically to exclude family members who might blow the whistle." "And the spending?" I asked. "The spending is egregiously misappropriated," Alicia said, "using a senior's credit for crypto gambling, laundering money to a sister's LLC. Lena, this is fraud. If your father is not aware of these specific charges, and given his state, I assume he is not, this is criminal." "She is trying to get a restraining order against me," I said. "She staged an assault. She broke a plate and claimed I did it." "Of course she did," Alicia said. "That is the isolation phase. She needs to discredit the only person competent enough to audit the books. If she gets a restraining order, you can't visit. If you can't visit, you can't see the mail. You can't see the decline. You become the estranged, violent daughter, and she becomes the saintly caretaker. It creates a narrative shield. She wants me to sign a behavioral agreement." "Do not sign anything," Alicia commanded. "Do not even text her. Anything you say will be twisted to fit the unstable profile." "So what do I do?" I looked at the screen, at the folder labeled Home. I can't just let her steal his life. "No, you can't," Alicia said. "But you can't fight this with emotion. You have to fight it with discovery. We need to prove 3 things. 1, that Ray Cartwright lacks the capacity to fully understand these financial instruments or is acting under undue influence. 2, that Marla Cartwright has breached her fiduciary duty as a spouse and potential power of attorney. And 3, that the assault was fabricated to facilitate the asset seizure." "I have proof of the 3rd one," I said quietly. "Or at least, I know where to get it." "Evan?" Alicia guessed. "Evan," I confirmed. "He was there. He saw her drop the plate. He is weak. Alicia, he is compromised because she is letting him gamble with Dad's money. But if I can squeeze him, if I can show him that he is going to go down with her—" "Then we have a lever," Alicia said. "Lena, listen to me. This is going to get ugly. She has already started the legal paperwork to paint you as the aggressor. We have to file a counterpetition. We need to file for an emergency accounting of the estate and potentially an emergency guardianship. But to do that, we need hard evidence that she is acting against his interest. This spreadsheet is a start, but we need more. We need a smoking gun." "I will get the smoking gun," I said. "How?" "I am a risk architect," I said, looking at the line item for Evan's gambling debts. "I know how to find the breaking point in a system, and right now, the weak link in Marla's system isn't the money, it's the accomplice." "Be careful," Alicia warned. "If she realizes you are building a case, she will accelerate. She might try to liquidate assets or move your father to a facility where you can't reach him." "She won't have time," I said. "She thinks she won. She thinks I am cowering in my apartment, afraid of a restraining order. She doesn't know I have the logs." I will start drafting the petition for a forensic accounting, Alicia said. I will call you in the morning. Try to get some sleep. I don't need sleep, I said, hovering my mouse over Evan's name in the spreadsheet. I need a meeting with my brother. I hung up the phone. The city lights of Seattle seemed sharper now. Less like a backdrop and more like a reflection of my own cold clarity. Marla had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. She thought glue and guilt would hold it together. She forgot that I was the one who knew how to blow things up. I opened a new browser window. I wasn't going to text Evan. A text could be ignored. I was going to find him where he lived. I navigated to the social tracking tools we used at work to vet potential employees. I typed in his handle. He was currently active on a Discord server for crypto day traders. I began to type. It was time to shake the tree and see what fell out. If I had thought the broken plate was the climax of the drama, I was naive. In Ridgewood Hills, a scandal is not an event. It is an ecosystem. It grows, it breathes, and it feeds on the one thing my stepmother, Marla, had in infinite supply: the willingness to lie while weeping. The rumors did not hit me like a wave. They seeped in like carbon monoxide, odorless and invisible until I was already choking. It started on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the dinner, while I was trying to focus on a risk assessment model for a new client. My personal phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Albright, the head of the Ridgewood Hills Charity League, and a woman who had known me since I was in braces. I hesitated, then answered, thinking perhaps she had news about my father. Lena, dear. Her voice came through the line, dripping with that specific brand of suburban concern that usually masks an interrogation. I am just calling to check on your spirit. We missed you at the fundraising planning meeting. Though, of course, Marla told us why you couldn't be there. My grip on the phone tightened. Oh, and what did Marla tell you? Well, she didn't go into details. Of course, she is too loyal for that, Mrs. Albright said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She just said that you are going through a very turbulent time emotionally. Something about work stress manifesting at home? We were all so shocked to hear about the incident with the china. That plate was such a treasure. I felt the blood rush to my face. Mrs. Albright, the plate fell. It was an accident. Of course, dear. Of course, she soothed, in a tone that clearly meant she believed the opposite. We all have moments where we lose control. I just wanted you to know that the prayer circle is lifting you up this week. We are praying for your calm and for your father's safety. Naturally, at his age, stress is such a killer. My father is fine, I said, my voice turning cold. And I am fine. Well, anger is a heavy burden. Lena, just know we are here if you need to talk about whatever it is that is making you so lash out. I hung up. My hand was shaking. Lash out. Safety. Turbulent. These were not Mrs. Albright's words. These were Marla's brand keywords, planted in the fertile soil of the church gossip chain and allowed to bloom. Marla hadn't just told them I broke a plate. She had framed it as a symptom of a mental break. She was painting a picture of a woman on the edge, and the community was eating it up. I tried to call my father immediately. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to break through the wall Marla was building brick by brick. The phone rang 4 times, then it went to voicemail. I called again an hour later, voicemail. I called again at lunch, voicemail. Finally, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the line picked up. Dad? I said, relief washing over me. Dad, I have been trying to reach you. Mrs. Albright called me and said, Lena. My father's voice cut me off. He sounded hollow, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. I can't talk long. Marla is resting. She has a migraine from all the crying. Dad, stop, I said, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of my office window. You need to listen to me. She is manipulating you. She is telling people I am dangerous. She is lying about the plate. We need time, Lena, Ray said. He was reciting lines. I could hear the unnatural cadence in his voice. the way he stumbled over the words as if reading from a cue card. There is too much conflict. You are always so intense. You come in with your energy and your arguments, and it is just too much for us right now. Intense? I repeated the word. It was the same word Marla had used to describe my mother before erasing her from the house. Dad, I am the one paying your mortgage. I am the one paying for your heart medication. Is that too intense for you? See, he sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. You are doing it right now. You are throwing money in my face. Marla said you would do that. She said you think you can buy the right to treat us badly. I am not treating you badly. I am trying to save you. I think it is best if we don't speak for a while, he said. Just until you can find a way to be softer. Goodbye, Lena. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling a mixture of heartbreak and fury. Softer. He wanted me to be softer while his wife was sharpening her knives. That evening, the digital assault began. I made the mistake of checking Facebook. I rarely used it, keeping an account only to track family updates. But curiosity got the better of me. I navigated to Marla's profile. There it was, a post made 2 hours ago. It was a photo of her holding a cup of tea, looking wistfully out the window at the Ridgewood Hills garden, the sun setting behind her in a perfect golden hour glow. The caption read, "Sometimes, the hardest thing a mother, even a bonus mom, can do is set boundaries with the people she loves. It breaks my heart to close the door, but I have to choose peace over toxicity. When a child you helped raise turns their pain into a weapon against the family, you have to protect the fragile ones, praying for healing and praying for safety in our own home. Choosing peace, family. Heartbreak. Safe haven." The post already had 84 likes and 30 comments. I scrolled through them, my stomach churning. Oh, Marla, you are a saint for putting up with it this long. Sending prayers. Ray doesn't need that kind of drama. I hope she gets the help she needs. You are doing the right thing protecting the nest. So brave of you to speak up. Abuse from children is real too. She hadn't named me. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. She had publicly labeled me an abuser without risking a libel suit, hiding behind the vague, passive-aggressive language of the suburban victim. She was crowdsourcing her credibility. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reply to every comment with the PDF of the credit card statements, with the logs of Evan's gambling, with the truth about the trust fund, but I knew, as a risk architect, that engaging in the comments section was a losing strategy. It would only make me look manic, proving her point. But the war didn't stay in the suburbs. 2 days later, it breached the firewall of my professional life. I was in the break room at Lumisphere, pouring my third coffee of the morning, when Marcus, a senior analyst who sat 2 desks down from me, walked in. He looked uncomfortable. "Hey, Lena," he said, shifting his weight. "Can I ask you something weird?" "Sure, Marcus. What is it? Did you apply for a job recently? Or maybe a loan?" I frowned. "No. Why?" "Okay. That is weird," Marcus said, scratching the back of his neck. "Because the main switchboard got a call this morning. I only know because the receptionist, Sarah, mentioned it to me. A woman called asking to verify your employment, which is standard. But then she started asking really odd questions. She asked if you had any history of workplace aggression or if you had ever been disciplined for emotional outbursts. She said she was doing a background check for a sensitive position." I froze. The coffee cup in my hand rattled against the saucer. "Did Sarah get a name?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "No. The caller ID was blocked. Sarah just said the woman sounded very concerned. She kept asking if the company felt safe with you handling sensitive data." My blood ran cold. Marla wasn't just venting to the neighbors. She was trying to destabilize my income. She knew that if I lost my job, or even if my security clearance was reviewed, I would lose the financial power to fight her. She was attacking my supply lines. "Thanks for telling me, Marcus," I said. "If she calls again, tell Sarah to transfer the call directly to legal." I walked back to my desk, my vision tunneling. This was an escalation I hadn't predicted. She was willing to scorch the earth of my career to keep the house. I pulled out my phone and texted Evan. I needed to know how far this was going to go. Me. She is calling my office. Evan. She is trying to get me fired. This isn't a game anymore. You need to tell Dad the truth about the plate. The reply came 3 minutes later. Evan. Look, Lee, I can't get in the middle of this. Mom is on a warpath. She is really rattled. TBH. It is best if you just avoid us for a while. Stay away. Let things cool down. Avoiding the house is safer for everyone right now. Just let her have her space. He didn't deny it. He didn't say you broke the plate. He just told me to surrender. Safer for everyone meant safer for Evan. He was watching the house burn and telling me not to call the fire department because the sirens might annoy the neighbors. I realized then that I was truly alone in the family. Evan wasn't a hostage. He was a collaborator. I needed Alicia. I drove to her office that evening. It was a small, brick building in the older part of the city, filled with stacks of files and the smell of old coffee. Alicia Byrne looked exactly like she sounded on the phone. Sharp, tired, and incapable of tolerating nonsense. She was holding a document when I walked in. Sit down. Lena, she said, not looking up. We have a problem. Did you see the financial analysis? I asked, sinking into the chair opposite her desk. I saw it. It is damning. But this, she tapped the paper in her hand, is immediate. She slid the document across the desk. Petition for order of protection from domestic abuse. Petitioner, Marla Cartwright. Respondent, Lena Cartwright. She filed it this morning, Alicia said. It is an ex parte request. That means she went before a judge without you present. She told her story. She cried her tears, and she asked the court to legally bar you from contacting her or your father. I picked up the paper, my hands trembling with rage. I read the allegations Marla had sworn to under penalty of perjury. The respondent has a history of volatile outbursts dating back to adolescence. On the night of Tuesday the 10th, the respondent became violent, destroying an antique heirloom in a fit of rage and striking the petitioner across the face. The respondent has threatened to use financial leverage to control the household. Petitioner fears for the safety of her elderly husband. She claimed I hit her, I whispered. She hit me. She slapped me. I believe you, Alicia said. But the judge didn't see you. The judge saw a terrified older woman claiming her stepdaughter is a threat. And in these cases, the court errs on the side of caution. They granted the temporary order. You are legally prohibited from going within 500 feet of the house or contacting Ray Cartwright until the full hearing in 3 weeks. This is insane. I stood up, pacing the small office. I can't be banned from seeing my own father. She is isolating him so she can rob him blind. Exactly, Alicia said calmly. That is the strategy. It is called silencing the whistleblower. By the time the hearing happens, she hopes to have solidified her control over the assets, or pressured Ray into signing that power of attorney claiming he is afraid of you. If the protection order becomes permanent, it is over. You will never get back into that house, and any attempt to fight the will becomes 10 times harder because you will have a judicial finding of abuse against you. So what do I do? I asked, turning to face her. Do I just let her win? Do I let her destroy my reputation and steal my mother's house? No, Alicia said. She stood up and walked to the whiteboard on the wall. She picked up a red marker. We fight, but we don't fight by shouting, she lied. That is, he said, she said. And she is a sympathetic elderly wife, and you are a scary corporate professional. We lose that contest. Alicia drew a circle on the board. We have to pivot, she said. We have to prove malice. We have to prove that this protection order is not about safety, but about strategy. We need to prove that she planned this. I have the financial motive, I said, pointing to my laptop bag. The financial motive helps, but it is circumstantial, Alicia argued. We need a smoking gun that connects the broken plate directly to the legal filing. We need proof that she staged the event. I thought about the dinner. I thought about the whispers. I thought about Evan. Evan, I said. Evan was there. He saw her flick her wrist. He told me she did it herself. He whispered it. Evan is currently listed as a witness for her, Alicia said, checking the file. His affidavit supports her version of events. He says you were agitated, and the plate fell during an argument. He is lying because she is paying his gambling debts, I said. Alicia stopped. She turned to look at me, the red marker hovering in the air. Gambling debts? She asked. Thousands of dollars, I said. Crypto, sports betting, paid for by Dad's credit cards, which Marla controls. If I expose the fraud, Evan goes down. Marla is holding that over him. That is why he is backing her. Alicia smiled. It was a shark's smile. Well then, she said, that changes the geometry of the battlefield. If Evan is testifying in exchange for financial cover-up, that is witness tampering. That is conspiracy. But I need him to flip, I said, and he is terrified of her. He should be more terrified of federal fraud charges, Alicia said. Lena, we are going to file a response, but we aren't just going to defend you. We are going to file a cross-petition for an emergency accounting of the estate, and we are going to subpoena Evan's financial records. He won't talk to me, I said. He blocked me. He doesn't have to talk to you, Alicia said. He has to talk to a deposition camera. But before we get there, you said you have a way to get the truth? I do, I said, thinking of the plan I had started formulating the night before. But it requires me to get close to him, and with this restraining order. The restraining order says you can't contact Marla or Ray, Alicia corrected. It doesn't say anything about Evan. He is an adult living in the house, but if you catch him outside, say, at a bar where he watches his sports bets? I nodded slowly. I know exactly where he goes on Thursday nights. Good, Alicia said. But Lena, you can't just ask him nicely. You have to record him. In this state, we are a one-party consent jurisdiction. As long as you are part of the conversation, you can record it without him knowing. I will get the confession, I said, feeling the cold architecture of the plan clicking into place. I will get him to admit she broke the plate. Get him to admit it, Alicia said, and then we burn the whole script down. I left Alicia's office with the heavy weight of the restraining order in my bag. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. Marla had the rumors. She had the church ladies. She had the sympathy of the court. But she had a weak link. She had a son who was bad with money and bad at keeping secrets. Marla had started a campaign of coercion. I was about to start a campaign of truth. And I was going to start it in a dive bar with a hidden microphone and a brother who had no idea that his safety net was about to be set on fire. The location I chose for the meeting was strategic. It was a 24-hour diner called the Golden Griddle, located off the interstate, a good 30-minute drive from the manicured, suffocating perfection of Ridgewood Hills. It was the kind of place with sticky laminate tables, coffee that tasted like burnt pennies, and flickering neon signs that hummed like trapped insects. It was a place where nobody knew the Cartwright name, and certainly nobody cared about the social standing of a stepmother who sat on the charity board. I texted Evan the location with a simple promise. No yelling, no drama, just pancakes, please. I arrived 20 minutes early. I sat in a booth in the back corner, facing the door, a habit from my job, always keeping the exit in sight. I ordered a black coffee and watched the steam rise, trying to steady my hands. I wasn't here to depose a witness. I was here to retrieve my brother. When Evan finally walked through the glass door, my heart sank. He looked terrible. At 24, he should have been in the prime of his life, vibrant and annoying in that confident way young men are. Instead, he looked like a man haunting his own life. He was wearing a hoodie pulled up over a baseball cap, and his skin had the gray, pasty quality of someone who hadn't seen the sun or slept in days. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and he had lost weight. He stood in the entryway, scanning the room with jerky, nervous movements, looking for threats. When his eyes landed on me, he hesitated. I could see the urge to bolt warring with the desperate need for a familiar face. I didn't wave, I just nodded. He walked over, sliding into the booth opposite me without taking off his jacket. He didn't look at me. He looked at the salt shaker. "You look like hell, Ev," I said softly. "I'm fine," he mumbled, his voice rough. "Just tired. Startups are a grind, you know?" "Cut the crap," I said, but I kept my voice gentle. "Order something. My treat." He ordered a stack of pancakes and a side of bacon, but when the food arrived, he just pushed it around the plate with his fork. The silence between us was thick, filled with the things we weren't saying. "Mom is really upset. Lena," he started, reciting the script I knew Marla had drilled into him. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. "She is terrified. She thinks you're going to come back and hurt her. She put in that protection order because she just wants peace. That is all she wants. Peace." I took a sip of my coffee. "Is that what she told you? That she wants peace?" "She says you push everything too far." Evan continued, his voice gaining a little defensive momentum. "You always have to make a scene. Dad is too old for this stress. Lee, his heart can't take it. Why couldn't you just apologize? Even if you didn't mean to break it, just apologize and move on." "I didn't break it, Evan." He flinched, his fork clattered against the ceramic plate. "See? This is what I mean," he said, looking up for the first time. His eyes were bloodshot. "You just keep digging. Why can't you just let it go?" "Because she is stealing the house," I said calmly, "and she is using you to do it." "She is not stealing anything. She is protecting Dad's assets." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I didn't slam it down. I slid it across the sticky table until it rested next to his untouched pancakes. "Open it," I said. He stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. "What is this?" "It is the truth," I said. "It is the paperwork for the Ridgewood Care Trust, and it is the credit card statements for the last 2 years. He froze. His hand hovered over the paper. "I know about the crypto losses." "Evan," I said, keeping my voice low so the waitress refilling coffees 2 tables away wouldn't hear. "I know about the $500 on Coinbase. I know about the $3,000 for the fake business seminar in Vegas. I know about the sports betting apps." Evan turned pale. I was investing. I was going to pay it back. It was a loan." "It wasn't a loan. It was theft," I said. "But I am not the one who is going to press charges. Marla is." He laughed, a nervous, jerky sound. "Mom wouldn't do that. She gave me the card. She supports my vision." "Read the trust document. Evan, page 4. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers. He pulled out the photocopy I had highlighted in yellow. "See where it lists the successor trustee?" I asked. "That is you. Marla made you the backup. Do you know why?" "Because she trusts me," he said weakly. "No, because if the audit happens, if the authorities come looking for the missing money, she needs a fall guy." I explained, using my professional tone, the one I used to explain risk vectors to CEOs. "She has authorized you as a user on the cards. She has put your name on the trust. When the debt bubble bursts, and it will burst, Evan, because there is over $40,000 in debt on those cards, she is going to say she didn't know. She is going to say her addict son stole the cards and manipulated her elderly husband." "She promised me," Evan snapped, his voice cracking. "She said when the trust settles, when Dad passes, she would wipe my slate clean. She said she would give me $50,000 from the insurance to start my company properly. She said she was the only one who believed in me." "She bought you," I said, leaning forward. "She bought your loyalty with Dad's money. She promised to forgive debt that she let you accrue just so she could own you." Evan slumped back in the booth. The fight went out of him. He looked small, like the little brother I used to shield from thunder. "I am in so deep. Lee," he whispered, putting his head in his hands. "I owe people, not just the cards. I owe bookies. If I don't get that payout, I'm dead." "You won't get the payout," I said, "because she is going to cut you loose the second you are not useful. But I can help you. I can help you fix the debt. But you have to tell me the truth." I waited. The diner hummed around us. "The night of the dinner," I said. "When you leaned over to me, you whispered something." He stayed silent, his face hidden in his palms. "You said, 'She did it herself.' Do you remember?" He nodded slowly. "Was that the first time, Evan?" I asked. He looked up. His eyes were wet. "What?" "Was that the first time she broke something on purpose and blamed me?" The question hung in the air. I saw a memory flicker behind his eyes. Something dark and buried. "The blue mug," he whispered. My breath hitched. "What?" "When we were kids," he said, his voice trembling. "You were 17. I was 12. You were in the kitchen. The blue mug broke. Dad came down and you were screaming that you didn't touch her." "I didn't," I said, the old injustice burning in my chest. "She said I shoved her into the island." "I was in the hallway," Evan said, tears spilling over his lashes. "I was coming to get a snack. I saw her. You turned to walk away, and she hooked her foot around the stool and threw herself back. She hit the island on purpose. Then she grabbed the mug off the counter and smashed it on the floor before she started screaming." I stared at him. For 13 years, I had wondered if maybe I had been clumsy, if maybe I had been too aggressive. Marla had gaslit me so effectively that I doubted my own memory. "You saw it?" I whispered. "You saw her fake it?" "Yeah," Evan choked out. "Why didn't you say anything?" My voice broke. "They sent me away. Evan. They sent me to live with Aunt Sarah for the whole summer because Dad thought I was violent. I missed my friends. I missed my home. Why didn't you tell him?" Evan looked down at his cold pancakes. "Because she saw me." "She saw you?" "She looked right at me in the doorway while Dad was yelling at you. She winked, and later that night, she came to my room with the PlayStation, the new one, the one Dad said we couldn't afford." He looked up at me, his face twisted with shame. She said, "You are the good one, Evan. You are the logical one. Lena is just sick. We have to help Dad by protecting him from her sickness." And she gave me the game, and I took it. I felt sick. I felt a physical nausea rolling in my stomach. My stepmother had bribed a 12-year-old boy with a video game to frame his sister for assault. It wasn't just manipulation. It was grooming. She had been training him to be her accomplice for over a decade. "She has been doing this forever," Evan said, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Every time she overspends, something breaks, and she blames you, or she blames the cleaners, or she blames Dad's memory." "And the plate?" I asked. "Tell me about the plate." Evan let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked around the diner, checking again for invisible spies. "It wasn't an impulse," he said quietly. "She practiced." I froze. "She what?" "2 days before the dinner," Evan said. "I came home early. She was in the dining room. She had a stack of cheap plates from Goodwill. She was standing at the table, practicing flicking them off the edge with the back of her wrist while pretending to reach for the salt." My blood ran cold. "She rehearsed it?" "She did it over and over," Evan said. "She would flick it, watch it break, and then practice the gasp. She practiced the face. Lena, that scared look? She did it in the mirror. She asked me, 'Does this look traumatic enough?' And you just watched?" "She told me it was the only way to save the house," Evan pleaded, his voice rising slightly. "She said you were trying to bankrupt us. She said you refused to sign the loan because you wanted us on the street. She said, 'We have to show your father how dangerous Lena is, or she will put him in a home and take everything.' She told me if I didn't back her up, the money for my startup would be gone, because you would freeze the accounts." "So she staged the play," I said, "and she cast me as the villain." "She told me exactly when to look down," Evan admitted. "She told me, 'When the plate breaks, don't look at Lena, look at your phone. If you look at her, you might look guilty. But when she hit you—'" He stopped. His hand was shaking so hard the water in his glass rippled. "When she slapped you," he whispered. "That wasn't in the script. She liked it. I saw her eyes. She enjoyed hitting you. And when I saw your face, Lee, you looked just like you did when we were kids. Just like when the mug broke. And I realized I'm next. He looked at me with terrified clarity. If she can do that to you, he said, if she can frame you and destroy you just because you said no to a loan, what is she going to do to me when the money runs out? What happens when I can't pay the bookie? She will say you stole it, I said. She will say her addict son abused her trust, and she will look like the saintly mother who tried her best. Evan put his head down on the table and began to sob. It wasn't a loud cry. It was the silent, shaking weeping of a man who realizes he has walked off a cliff. I reached across the table. I didn't hug him. I put my hand over his hand, covering his trembling fingers with my steady ones. You have a choice, Evan, I said. You can stay on her side, and when the ship sinks, you drown with her, or you can help me. He lifted his head. How? She has the lawyers. She has Dad. I have the truth, I said, and now I have you. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It had been face down on the table the entire time, the voice memo app recording every second of our conversation. I need you to say it one more time, I said. Not for me, for the judge. Evan looked at the phone, then he looked at me. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his chest. He looked at the neon sign buzzing in the window, casting a red glow over the cheap laminate table. He looked like a man stepping out of a long, dark tunnel. She practiced it, he said, his voice gaining a strange, new strength. She bought cheap plates to rehearse. She told me to lie, and on the night of the dinner, when the heirloom broke, he leaned into the phone, his eyes locking with mine. She did it herself. I stopped the recording. Okay, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. Finish your pancakes. Evan, we have a lot of work to do. He didn't eat, but for the first time in years, he didn't look like a ghost. He looked like my brother, and for the first time, I wasn't just fighting a war. I was leading a revolution. Marla had taken my past, but she wasn't going to take his future. What do we do now? He asked, wiping his face. Now, I said, sliding a $20 bill onto the table for the check. Now we set the trap. She likes theatrical performances? Fine. We are going to give her one she will never forget. The diner meeting was the turning point, but it was not the victory. A confession whispered over cold pancakes is not evidence. It is hearsay. In the cold, hard light of the legal system, truth does not matter unless it can be captured, cataloged, and authenticated. I drove Evan to Alicia's office immediately after he finished his confession. He sat in the passenger seat of my car, looking like a man being driven to his own execution. He was terrified of Marla, but as I explained the federal statutes regarding wire fraud and elder abuse, he began to realize that his mother's wrath was a candle compared to the forest fire of the judicial system. Alicia did not offer him tea. She offered him a plea deal drafted on her yellow legal pad. Here is the reality, Evan, Alicia said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You are currently an accessory to financial fraud. You used credit cards obtained through coercion. You are listed as the successor trustee on a document created to embezzle your father's estate. If this goes to trial without your cooperation, you go down with the ship, and given the paper trail Lena has found, that ship is sinking fast. Evan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. And if I help? If you help, Alicia leaned forward. We frame your involvement as manipulation by a predatory parent. We argue that you were groomed and coerced. We ask the judge for leniency, but for that to work, you need to stop being a son and start being an informant. Evan looked at me. I didn't smile. I nodded. Okay, he whispered. What do I have to do? We need her to say it, I said. We need her to admit that the plate incident was staged. We need her to admit the purpose of the restraining order is financial control, not safety, and we need it on tape. The preparation for the sting operation felt less like family therapy and more like a corporate espionage mission. My background at Lumisphere Stratagem Labs came into play. I knew that a simple phone recording might be muffled or easily dismissed as ambiguous. We needed high-fidelity audio. I went to a specialty electronics store downtown and bought a digital voice recorder that looked exactly like a standard USB drive. It had a 20-hour battery life and a sensitive omnidirectional microphone. I instructed Evan to attach it to his keychain, right next to his car fob. It was inconspicuous, something he would naturally have on the table or in his hand. "Do not force it," I instructed him, standing in the parking lot outside the house he shared with our father and the woman trying to destroy me. "If you push too hard, she will get suspicious. You have to play into her ego. Marla loves to feel smart. She loves to feel like she is the only one who sees the big picture. Make her feel like a genius, and she will tell you how she did the trick." Evan nodded, his hands trembling as he thumbed the small switch on the side of the USB drive. "I can do this." "You have to," I said. "For Dad?" I waited 3 streets away in my car, staring at my phone, waiting for the text that would tell me it was done. It was the longest 45 minutes of my life. Inside the house, as Evan later recounted and the audio confirmed, the scene was domestic and terrifyingly normal. Marla was in the kitchen, drinking a glass of Chardonnay, feeling victorious. She had the temporary protection order. She had me out of the house. She thought she had won. When I finally listened to the file later that night, the clarity of her voice made my skin crawl. Click, rustle of fabric, footsteps. "You look tense, honey," Marla's voice purred from the speaker. "You need to relax. The hard part is over." "I am just worried, Mom." Evan's voice sounded shaky, but it played well as anxiety. "I mean, the court date is coming up. What if Lena fights it? What if she has proof?" "Proof of what?" Marla laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "She wasn't even in the room when the plate fell. No one saw it but us. And your father, well, Ray sees what I tell him to see. He is so desperate for quiet. He would believe the sky is green if it meant Lena stopped shouting." "But the judge," Evan pressed. "Judges are smart. What if he asks for details? What if he thinks it looks staged?" "Oh, Evan, you are so naive," Marla sighed. I could hear the clink of the wine bottle against a glass. "Family court isn't about CSI evidence. It is about narrative. And we have the perfect narrative. The rich, cold, career-obsessed daughter versus the frail, frightened stepmother. It is a classic. People love to hate a woman like Lena. She makes it easy. She is so rigid." "But the slap," Evan said. "You hit her pretty hard. What if she took pictures of the bruise?" There was a pause. I held my breath listening to the recording. "Let her show the pictures," Marla said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I will just say it was self-defense. I will say she lunged at me, and I put my hand up to protect my face. That is why I practiced the scream. Evan, you have to sell the fear. If you scream loud enough, it doesn't matter who hit who. The neighbors only heard the fear. That is what they will remember." "You practiced the scream?" Evan asked. "Like, in the mirror?" "Of course," Marla boasted. "Just like I practiced the drop. You have to get the angle right so it shatters forward, toward her. If it falls straight down, it looks like an accident. If it shatters forward, it looks like she pulled it. It is simple physics, darling. And it worked, didn't it? She walked right into the trap. She looked so arrogant sitting there, refusing to sign the loan. Well, now she doesn't get to sign anything." "So, the restraining order," Evan said, "that is just to keep her away, for safety?" "It is to keep her away from the bank accounts. Evan," Marla snapped, sounding impatient, "once the order is permanent, I can trigger the clause in the trust. Domestic tranquility. As soon as a judge rules she is a threat, I get full power of attorney over everything. Then we can pay off your little debts, sell this money pit of a house, and move to Arizona like we planned. But we have to hold the line until the hearing. You have to stick to the script. She attacked me. She broke the plate. She is dangerous." "Okay," Evan said softly. "She is dangerous." "She did it to herself," Marla said, echoing the very words Evan had whispered to me, but twisting them. "She chose money over us. I just helped her face the consequences." Click. I sat in my apartment, the silence ringing in my ears after the recording ended. It was everything. It was intent, malice, premeditation, and fraud, all wrapped in a wine-soaked confession. But I wasn't done. A single recording could be challenged. They could claim it was taken out of context. I needed to fortify the walls of this case until there was no way out. I spent the next 2 days conducting surveillance on my own childhood home, but not from a parked car. I did it by canvassing the neighborhood. I approached the neighbors, not the church friends Marla had groomed, but the ones she ignored. The gardener who worked 2 houses down, the teenager who walked dogs in the evening, Mrs. Gable, the insomniac widow who lived directly across the street. Mrs. Gable was my goldmine. "Oh, I see things, dear," Mrs. Gable told me over tea in her living room. Once I explained I was worried about my father's health. "I see her when no one is visiting. She yells at him. Terrible things. I heard her in the driveway last week, screaming at Ray to walk faster and calling him a useless old man. But then the mailman walked up, and she switched. Snap. Just like that. Suddenly she was adjusting his collar and cooing at him. It gave me the shivers." "Would you be willing to write that down?" I asked. "An affidavit? Just stating what you saw?" "For Ray?" she said. "Yes. He is a good man. He just looks so broken lately." With the neighbor's affidavit and the audio recording, I went to Dave, the lead forensic data analyst at Lumisphere. Dave owed me a favor after I caught a coding error that would have cost him his job last year. "I need you to authenticate this audio file." I told him, "I need a full spectral analysis. I need you to certify that there are no splices, no edits, no AI generation. I need a chain of custody report that will stand up in federal court." Dave ran the file through the same software we use to detect deepfake voice fraud in banking systems. He gave me a 20-page report filled with waveforms and frequency charts, stamped with his professional certification. It proved the recording was continuous, organic, and unaltered. We were ready. Alicia filed the motion on a Friday afternoon, just before the courts closed. It was a strategic timing designed to ruin Marla's weekend. We didn't just file a defense against the restraining order, we filed a counterpetition. State of Washington versus Marla Cartwright. Counterpetition for emergency guardianship. Civil complaint for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and elder financial abuse. We attached the forensic accounting of the credit cards. We attached the affidavit from Mrs. Gable, and listed as Exhibit A was a transcript of a digital audio recording titled Confession of Intent. We also filed a motion to depose Evan Cartwright, with a note that he was cooperating with the investigation. When the process server delivered the papers to the house in Ridgewood Hills, I wasn't there, but I could imagine the scene. I imagined Marla opening the door, expecting a package from Amazon or a sympathy card from a church friend, and instead being handed a stack of legal documents thick enough to be a novel. The court date was set for the 15th of the month at the county courthouse. Marla did not back down. This was the part of her psychology I had to respect. In a twisted way. She was a narcissist. Even when confronted with the threat of exposure, she believed she could charm her way out of it. She believed her performance was flawless. She posted on Facebook again, "The enemy attacks hardest when you are closest to the light. Legal bullying is just another form of abuse. Standing strong for my husband. Truth wins." She arrived at the courthouse on the day of the hearing wearing a pastel blue suit, the color of innocence. She walked arm in arm with my father, who looked more frail than I had ever seen him. He was her prop, her shield. She looked confident, smiling sadly at her supporters from the church who had filled the back benches of the courtroom. I arrived separately. I didn't bring a crowd. I brought Alicia. I brought 3 bankers' boxes of files, and I brought Evan. When Marla saw Evan walking in behind me, not beside her, her step faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, she looked at him, her eyes widening, trying to make eye contact, trying to engage the telepathic control she had exerted over him for a decade. Evan didn't look at her. He looked at his shoes. Then he looked at the judge's bench. He was pale, sweating. and looked like he might vomit, but he was standing on my side of the aisle. The courtroom was an old, wood-paneled room that smelled of floor wax and anxiety. Judge Holloway was a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose and a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics. Marla's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Trent, who usually handled estate planning, stood up first. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming, "we are here to protect a vulnerable senior citizen and his devoted wife from the harassment of an estranged, volatile daughter. The evidence will show that Ms. Lena Cartwright has a history of aggression and that the incident on the 10th was a physical assault." He painted a picture of me that was monstrous. He talked about the broken plate as if I had thrown it like a discus at Marla's head. He talked about my obsession with money. I sat still. I didn't fidget. I didn't shake my head. I let him build the castle of lies as high as he wanted. Then it was Alicia's turn. "Your Honor," Alicia said, standing up and buttoning her blazer, "we agree that this case is about protection, but the person who needs protection is not Mrs. Cartwright. It is Mr. Raymond Cartwright, and he needs protection from the woman sitting next to him." "Objection!" Mr. Trent shouted. "Unfounded accusations." "We are prepared to present evidence, Your Honor," Alicia said calmly. "Evidence of financial embezzlement, evidence of witness tampering, and evidence that the assault described by the petitioner was a premeditated, staged event designed to manipulate this court into granting control of a trust fund." The judge looked over her glasses. "Staged event? That is a serious accusation. Counselor." "We have more than an accusation, Your Honor," Alicia said. "We have a confession." She picked up the USB drive, now tagged as evidence in a plastic bag. "And we have the eyewitness testimony of the only other person in the room, Mr. Evan Cartwright." I watched Marla. For the first time, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She turned to look at Evan, and the look on her face wasn't fear. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the face she had shown me in the kitchen 13 years ago when she broke the blue mug. But this time, there were witnesses. This time, the court reporter was typing every twitch. "Call your first witness," the judge said. "We call Evan Cartwright," Alicia said. As Evan stood up and walked toward the witness stand, passing his mother, Marla hissed something. It was too quiet for the microphone, but I read her lips. "Traitor." Evan sat in the chair. He took the oath. He looked at me, and I gave him a small, barely perceptible nod. "Mr. Cartwright," Alicia asked, "were you present in the dining room on the night the plate was broken?" "Yes," Evan said, his voice trembling. "Did your sister, Lena Cartwright, touch the plate?" "No." A gasp went through the church ladies in the back row. "Who broke the plate, Evan?" Evan took a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a second, as if saying a final goodbye to the life of easy lies he had lived for so long. "My mother did," he said, his voice gaining volume. "She flicked it off the table. She practiced it for 2 days. She said she needed to make Lena look dangerous so she could get the power of attorney." "Liar!" Marla screamed. She stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "He is lying. She paid him. She is buying him off." "Sit down, Mrs. Cartwright," the judge bellowed, banging the gavel. "She is brainwashing him," Marla shrieked, pointing at me. "She is the devil. She wants the money." "Mrs. Cartwright, if you do not sit down, I will have you removed," the judge warned. Marla sat, breathing heavily. Her face flushed red, but the damage was done. The frail, terrified victim had just screamed at the judge and the witness with the lung capacity of a drill sergeant. "Permission to play Exhibit A, Your Honor," Alicia said. The judge nodded. Alicia plugged the drive into the court's AV system. A moment later, Marla's voice filled the room. "Just like I practiced the drop. It is simple physics, darling. She did it to herself." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. My father, who had been staring at his hands, slowly lifted his head. He looked at the speaker. Then he turned, very slowly, to look at his wife. Marla wasn't looking at him. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw set, her eyes dead. She knew the heuristic model had predicted a 99% chance of success. She had failed to account for the one variable I controlled, the truth. I looked at her profile, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of her. I didn't feel angry. I felt the cold, clinical satisfaction of a system error being corrected. The trap was sprung, the heist was complete. Now, all that was left was the sentencing. The hallway outside courtroom 3B was not empty. It was a gauntlet. The benches were lined with the familiar faces of the Ridgewood Hills Church Choir and the Neighborhood Garden Club, a sea of silver hair and concerned expressions. They had turned out in force, not for justice, but for the performance. To them, this was not a legal hearing. It was a moral crusade to support a devoted wife against a volatile, estranged daughter. I walked through them with my head high, keeping my eyes fixed on the double doors ahead, but I could feel their judgment radiating like heat. I heard the whispers. So cold. Poor Marla. Look at her suit. So expensive. Probably bought with her father's money. They had no idea that the suit I was wearing was the armor I had bought to fight the woman who was currently robbing them of their sympathy under false pretenses. Marla was already there. She had staged herself perfectly near the entrance. She was wearing a charcoal skirt suit that looked slightly too big, emphasizing her frailty. She was clinging to my father's arm with both hands, her head resting on his shoulder. Ray looked terrible. His skin was the color of old ash, and his eyes darted back and forth between the courtroom doors and the floor, unable to focus. He looked like a man who had been awake for a week, or perhaps a man who had been medicated into submission. When our eyes met, Marla didn't glare. She gave me a look of profound, tragic disappointment. It was a look designed for the audience, a look that said, "I forgive you, even though you are destroying us." My father saw me. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to say my name, but Marla squeezed his arm. I saw the pressure of her fingers through the fabric of his jacket. He closed his mouth and looked down. Inside, the courtroom was sterile and cold. Judge Holloway took the bench with an air of impatience that usually signaled she had a full docket and little tolerance for family drama. Marla took the stand first. Her testimony was a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't play the angry victim. She played the heartbroken mother. She kept her voice low, forcing the courtroom to lean in, forcing the judge to listen closely. Her hands trembled visibly as she clasped them in her lap. "I have tried so hard with Lena," Marla said, a single tear tracking perfectly down her cheek. "Since she was 16, I have tried to be a friend, but there is so much anger in her. It is like a switch flips. One minute she is fine, and the next, things get broken." She turned to the judge, her eyes wide and pleading. "I didn't want to file this order, Your Honor, I really didn't. But when she stood over me that night, screaming, with the shattered pieces of Ray's mother's plate on the floor, I saw a look in her eyes that I haven't seen since the day she attacked me in the kitchen when she was a teenager. I was terrified. Not for me, but for Ray. He is so fragile. I just want him to be safe." I sat at the respondent's table, my fingernails digging into my palms. It was happening again. I was 16 years old, standing in the kitchen with a bruised wrist, listening to her rewrite reality while my father nodded along. The helplessness washed over me, a cold tide threatening to pull me under. She was so convincing. Even I, knowing the truth, found myself mesmerized by the consistency of her lie. Then Alicia Byrne stood up. Alicia didn't look sympathetic. She looked like a scalpel. She walked to the podium, placing a stack of documents on the wood with a heavy thud. "Mrs. Cartwright," Alicia began, her voice devoid of warmth. "You claim that your primary concern is the safety and well-being of your husband, Raymond Cartwright. Is that correct?" "It is my only concern," Marla whispered. "And you claim that Lena Cartwright is a threat to that well-being?" "Yes. Her outbursts cause him terrible stress." "Let us talk about stress," Alicia said. She picked up the first document. "Mrs. Cartwright, Are you aware that in the last 5 years, Lena Cartwright has transferred a total of $82,000 to your joint bank account to cover household expenses and medical bills? Marla blinked. The rhythm of her performance faltered. Well, she has helped out occasionally, as a daughter should. $82,000 is not helping out, Mrs. Cartwright. It is a salary, Alicia said. And are you aware that on the same week you claimed to have been terrified of Lena, you asked her to co-sign a line of credit for $50,000? We needed to secure Ray's retirement, Marla said, her voice sharpening. She refused. She chose money over her father. No, Alicia corrected. She refused to enable your spending. Let us look at Exhibit C, the credit card statements. Alicia projected the document onto the screen behind the witness stand. The rows of numbers were magnified for everyone to see. Can you explain to the court why, in a month where you claimed you couldn't afford Ray's heart medication without Lena's help, there is a charge for $650 at Nordstrom? I needed clothes for church, Marla stammered. Appearances matter for Ray's dignity. And the $300 a month for the Ridgewood Day Spa? Alicia pressed. Is that for Ray's dignity too? I have severe migraines, Marla snapped, the mask slipping for a second. I need treatments. And the Ridgewood Care Trust. Alicia moved on relentlessly. You amended the bylaws to include a clause about domestic tranquility exactly 2 weeks before the dinner party, a clause that gives you full control of the assets if Lena is deemed a threat. That is quite a coincidence, isn't it? I was being prudent, Marla cried, looking at the judge. We knew she was becoming unstable. I was just preparing for the worst. Judge Holloway was watching Marla now. Her eyebrows knit together. The financial evidence was making a dent. I could see the doubt creeping into the judge's eyes, but it wasn't enough. Marla had explained it away as prudence and lifestyle maintenance. A judge might see her as greedy, but that didn't prove she was a liar about the assault. Greed is not a crime in family court. Violence is. Alicia walked back to the table and looked at me. We both knew this was the moment. The finances were the smoke. We needed the fire. Your Honor, Alicia said, turning to the bench. The defense calls Evan Cartwright to the stand. The air in the room changed instantly. Marla's head snapped toward the back of the courtroom. She hadn't realized Evan was with us. She had assumed he was hiding, or perhaps waiting in the hallway to support her. When she saw him stand up from the bench directly behind me, her face went slack. Evan looked like a ghost. He was wearing a suit that hung loosely on his frame, and his hands were shaking so badly he had to clench them into fists at his sides. He walked down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles, refusing to look at the woman who had raised him. As he passed the plaintiff's table, Marla leaned forward. She didn't speak, but her eyes were screaming. It was a look of such intense, concentrated malice that I saw Ray flinch away from her instinctively. She was willing him to be silent. She was reminding him of every debt, every secret, every gift she had bought with stolen money. Evan took the stand. He sat down and gripped the edges of the chair as if he were holding on for dear life. State your name for the record, the bailiff said. Evan Cartwright, he whispered. Mr. Cartwright? Alicia said, approaching him gently. You are the son of Marla Cartwright and the stepson of Raymond Cartwright. Is that correct? Yes. And you were present at the dinner on the evening of the 10th? Yes. Evan, Alicia said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. Did you see Lena Cartwright strike your mother? Evan swallowed. He looked at Marla. She was staring at him, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Her eyes promised retribution. They promised exposure. They promised that if he spoke, she would burn him down with her. He looked at Ray, who was slumped in his chair, looking confused and broken. Then he looked at me. I didn't plead. I just sat there, witnessing him. No, Evan said. His voice was shaky, barely audible. Can you speak up, Mr. Cartwright? The judge asked. No, Evan said, louder this time. Lena didn't hit her. Mom lunged at her. Lena put her hands up to block it. That was it. Liar, Marla hissed from her seat. Mr. Trent put a hand on her arm to silence her. And the plate, Evan? Alicia asked. The heirloom plate. Did Lena break it? Evan closed his eyes. He was sweating. No. Who broke the plate? My mother did, Evan said. The words rushed out of him. She flicked it off the table with her wrist. She wanted it to look like Lena did it. Why? Alicia asked. Why would she destroy a valuable family heirloom? Because she needed a reason, Evan said, tears starting to track down his face. She needed a reason to get the restraining order. She told me if Lena wasn't out of the way, we would lose the house. She said we had to make Lena look dangerous so the judge would sign the papers. Objection! Mr. Trent stood up. This is hearsay, Your Honor. This witness is clearly under duress. He has been coerced by his sister. I have proof, Alicia said calmly. Your Honor, we would like to enter Exhibit D into evidence. It is a digital audio recording made by Mr. Cartwright 3 days ago. The judge nodded. Proceed. Alicia pressed the button on her laptop. The speakers mounted on the courtroom walls crackled to life. The room filled with the sound of Marla's voice. It was casual, arrogant, and terrifyingly clear. You have to sell the fear. If you scream loud enough, it doesn't matter who hit who. The neighbors only heard the fear. Marla froze. She stopped breathing. Her face turned a color I had never seen before, a draining of blood so total she looked like a wax figure. Just like I practiced the drop. You have to get the angle right so it shatters forward. It is simple physics, darling. The church ladies in the back row gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. They were hearing their saint admit to the sin. They were hearing the woman they prayed for mocking their gullibility. She did it to herself. She chose money over us. I just helped her face the consequences. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing under its own weight. Judge Holloway slowly took off her glasses. She looked at the recording device, then she turned her gaze to Marla. It was a look of cold, judicial fury. Mrs. Cartwright, the judge said, her voice low. Did you just admit on tape to staging a domestic violence incident to manipulate this court? Marla stood up. She was shaking, but not with fear anymore. She was shaking with rage. The mask was gone. The frailty was gone. She looked like a cornered animal. It was a private conversation, she shouted, her voice shrill and ugly. That was recorded without my permission. It is illegal. It is a one-party consent state, Mrs. Cartwright, the judge said icily, and the content of the recording is an admission of perjury and fraud. He made me say it. Marla pointed a trembling finger at Evan. He is a gambler. He stole from us. Lena paid him to lie. They are conspiring against me. She turned to Ray, grabbing his lapels, shaking him. Ray, tell them. Tell them how she treats us. Tell them she is crazy. Ray looked up at her, for the first time in years. His eyes were clear. He looked at the woman screaming in his face, the woman who had just admitted to breaking his mother's plate, the one object he had cherished above all else. He looked at her hands clutching his jacket, the hands that had spent thousands of his dollars on clothes while he worried about his heart medication. He gently, firmly, peeled her fingers off his jacket. Marla, Ray said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decade of suppressed truth. Sit down. Marla recoiled as if he had slapped her. Alicia turned back to Evan on the stand. Mr. Cartwright, she said, is there anything else you want to say to the court? Evan looked at Marla, who was now slumped in her chair, staring at the table with hate-filled eyes. Then he looked at me. He took a deep breath, and I saw the boy I used to know, the brother I had lost, finally come back to the surface. He leaned into the microphone. She did it herself, Evan said. The words rang out, clear and final. She did it all herself, he continued, his voice steadying. The plate, the blue mug when we were kids, the rumors, she did it all. and she made me watch, but I am done watching." He looked at the judge. "My sister isn't dangerous, Your Honor. She is the only one who has been trying to save us." Judge Holloway nodded. She picked up her gavel. "The temporary order of protection is dismissed with prejudice," she ruled, her voice booming. "Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order against Marla Cartwright, barring her from the residence and from any financial accounts held jointly or solely by Raymond Cartwright. I am also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into perjury, fraud, and elder abuse." "No!" Marla screamed. "You can't do this! It is my house!" "Bailiff," the judge said, pointing a finger at Marla, "please escort Mrs. Cartwright to the hallway while we sort out the custody of the assets." 2 uniformed officers stepped forward. Marla looked around the room, looking for an ally. She looked at the church group. They looked away, studying their shoes, clutching their handbags. She looked at Ray. He was looking at me. She looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her with the flat, analytical gaze of a risk architect who had successfully identified and neutralized a system threat. "It is over, Marla," I mouthed. She screamed as the bailiffs took her arms, a raw, guttural sound of entitlement being ripped away. They dragged her out of the courtroom, her heels skidding on the floor, her voice echoing down the hallway where her supporters stood in stunned silence. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off her screams. The courtroom was quiet. I stood up and walked over to Evan. He stepped down from the stand, his legs shaking again. He looked at me, waiting for judgment, waiting for me to remind him that he was an accomplice for 10 years. I didn't. I pulled him into a hug. He collapsed against me, sobbing into my shoulder, the tension of a decade breaking inside him. "I got you," I whispered. "We are going to fix the rest. But you did good. Ev, you did good." Over his shoulder, I saw my father standing up. He looked older, frailer, but he was standing on his own. He walked toward us, navigating the space between the tables slowly. He stopped a few feet away, looking at us with eyes full of tears and regret. "Lena," he said, his voice cracked. "Bean." I looked at him. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. He had let it happen. He had chosen the lie for too long. But the siege was over. The fortress had fallen. And for the first time in 13 years, the man standing in front of me wasn't Marla's husband. He was just my dad. "Let's go home." "Dad," I said. "We have a lot of paperwork to shred." The silence that followed Evan's testimony was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely necessary. For years, the air in the Cartwright household had been filled with Marla's noise, her weeping, her accusations, her rewritten histories. Now, in the vacuum left by the truth, her power simply evaporated. Judge Holloway did not look at Marla with pity. She looked at her with the sharp, dissecting gaze of a woman who had heard every lie in the book and had finally found the page where the story broke. The judge leaned forward, her robes rustling in the quiet room. "Mrs. Cartwright," Judge Holloway said, her voice devoid of the patience she had shown earlier, "you came into my courtroom seeking an order of protection based on a claim of violence. Your own son has just testified, under oath, that this violence was staged. Your own voice, on a verified recording, admits to premeditating a fraud to secure financial control. This court does not take kindly to being used as a weapon." Marla stood there, clutching the edge of the table. The facade of the fragile, terrified wife had cracked wide open. She looked around the room, searching for the friendly faces that had buoyed her confidence an hour ago. But the church ladies in the back row were studying their handbags, refusing to meet her eyes. My father was staring at his shoes. Even her lawyer, Mr. Trent, had shifted his chair slightly away from her, creating a physical distance that spoke volumes. Alicia stood up to deliver the final blow. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply connected the dots with the precision of a surgeon closing a wound. "Your Honor," Alicia said, gesturing to the projection screen where my spreadsheet still glowed. The pattern is undeniable. The broken blue mug 13 years ago, the broken plate last week. These were not accidents. They were manufactured crises designed to alienate Mr. Cartwright from his daughter. Why? Because Lena Cartwright was the only person auditing the books. Marla Cartwright realized she could not hide the $40,000 of credit card debt or the misappropriation of the trust funds as long as Lena was in the picture. So, she decided to remove the auditor. She weaponized the legal system to silence the one person trying to save the estate. Marla opened her mouth to scream, to deny, to launch into another performance, but the sound died in her throat. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that the audience had left the theater. "The court has heard enough," Judge Holloway ruled. "The temporary protection order against Lena Cartwright is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence of financial irregularities and potential coercion presented here today, I am ordering an immediate freeze on the Ridgewood Care Trust." "You can't do that!" Marla shrieked, the raw, ugly sound of desperation finally breaking through. "That is my money. I am the trustee." "Not anymore," the judge snapped. "I am suspending your trusteeship effective immediately pending a full forensic investigation. You are barred from accessing any joint accounts held with Raymond Cartwright. You are barred from making any financial decisions on his behalf." Then, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a gray suit walked in. I recognized him immediately. It was District Attorney Miller. He had been sitting in the back row for the last hour, silent and observant. He walked past the bar and nodded to the judge. "Your Honor," the district attorney said, his voice carrying easily to the front. "The district attorney's office is formally opening a file on this matter. Based on the testimony regarding the staged assault and the sworn admissions on the recording, we are investigating charges of perjury, fraud, and elder financial abuse. We request that Mrs. Cartwright surrender her passport and remain within the jurisdiction until preliminary interviews are completed." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot ending the war. "So ordered," the judge said. "Court is adjourned." Chaos erupted, but it was a muted, shuffling kind of chaos. The bailiff moved toward Marla, not to arrest her yet, but to serve her with the immediate paperwork restricting her movements. She looked small now. The expensive suit she had bought with my father's credit card looked like a costume she didn't know how to wear. I didn't look at her. I turned to my father. Ray Cartwright was still sitting at the plaintiff's table. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. He stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. He looked at Marla, who was arguing frantically with her lawyer, and then he looked across the aisle at me. I walked over to the wooden barrier separating us. "Dad," I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and bewildered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, one of the evidence sheets Alicia had distributed. It was the summary of my transfers. "Lena," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Is this true? $82,000? I nodded. "Yes, Dad." "But Marla said you refused to help," he stammered, trying to reconcile the two realities in his head. "She said you were stingy. She said the reason we were drowning was because you wouldn't contribute. She told me the roof repair cost $10,000, and she had to borrow it from her sister." "I paid the contractor directly, Dad," I said. $3,000. There was no loan from her sister." He looked at the paper, then back at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The peace he had prioritized for years, the silence he had bought by sacrificing me, had been funded by my own paycheck. He had let his wife abuse me while I was paying for the roof over his head. "I didn't know," he choked out, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "I swear. Bean, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said. "It wasn't cruel. It was just a fact. But now you do." He reached for my hand, but I didn't take it. Not yet. The gap between us was bridged by truth, but it wasn't healed. We walked out of the courtroom together. Me, Alicia, Evan, and my father trailing behind. The hallway was a different world than the one I had entered. The crowd of supporters had thinned, and those who remained looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Albright, the woman who had told me the church was praying for my calm, was standing near the water fountain. When she saw me, she didn't offer a platitude. She looked at Marla, who was being escorted out by her lawyer and a bailiff, and then she looked at me with a mix of confusion and shame. They had backed the predator because she looked like a victim, and they had condemned the savior because I looked like a threat. They realized now that they had been standing on the wrong side of the line. We walked out the front doors of the courthouse into the cool afternoon air. The reality of the legal system was waiting at the curb. 2 uniformed officers were waiting by Marla's car. They weren't there to arrest her, but to serve a subpoena for the criminal investigation. I watched as she stopped, her face pale, as the officer handed her the document. She looked back at us, at the family she had tried to divide and conquer. And for the first time, she was on the outside. The Ridgewood Care Trust couldn't protect her. The rumors couldn't protect her. Evan was standing next to me, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. He took a deep drag and exhaled a plume of smoke that drifted toward the parking lot. "I'm sorry, Lee," he said, not looking at me. I turned to him. He looked exhausted, stripped of the bravado he usually wore to hide his fear. "I was a coward," he said, his voice breaking. "I knew what she was doing. I knew it with the mug. I knew it with the plate. It was easier to let you be the bad guy. She made it so easy to be on her side. As long as you don't ask questions, I sold you out for a PlayStation and a credit card." He looked at me then, his eyes raw and honest. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me." I looked at him. I saw the 12-year-old boy who had been bribed into silence. I saw the 24-year-old man who had just destroyed his own safety net to save me. "I am not going to tell you it is okay, Evan," I said steadily. "It wasn't okay. You let me bleed for years." He nodded, accepting the verdict. "But today," I continued, "when she stared you down, when she tried to intimidate you, you didn't blink. You said it. You said it where it actually mattered. That counts for something." I reached out and squeezed his shoulder. It wasn't a hug of total absolution, but it was an acknowledgement. He had chosen a side. Finally. My father was standing a few feet away, looking at the 3 of us. He looked lost. He had no wife to tell him what to think, no money to hide behind, and a daughter who had outgrown his protection. "What happens now?" Ray asked, his voice trembling. "Who manages the money? If Marla is suspended, do you take over? Lena, is that what you wanted?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the final document Alicia had prepared. "No, Dad," I said. "I don't want control. That is what Marla wanted. I just want the truth." I handed him the file. "This is a petition I filed this morning," I explained. "It asks the court to appoint an independent, third-party professional fiduciary to manage your estate. Not me, not Evan, a professional. They will pay the bills. They will audit the accounts, and they will ensure nobody, not even family, can steal from you again." Ray stared at the paper. "You don't want the house?" "I never wanted the house, Dad," I said, feeling the final weight lift off my shoulders. "I have my own house. I have my own life. I just didn't want her to steal yours." He looked at me, and for the first time, he really saw me. He didn't see the intense teenager or the cold career woman. He saw the risk architect who had stepped into a burning building, put out the fire, and then walked out without asking for a medal. "I am so sorry, Bean," he whispered. "I know, Dad," I said. "We will talk next week, but right now, I need to go." I didn't offer to drive him home. I didn't offer to cook him dinner. He needed to sit in that quiet house and look at the empty spaces where the lies used to be. He needed to feel the reality of his own choices. I turned to Alicia. She was smiling, a sharp, satisfied smile. "Nice work, architect," she said. "Nice work, counselor," I replied. I walked toward my car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I could see the reflection of the police cruiser's lights dancing on the glass facade of the courthouse. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of the crowd dispersing. The end of the show. I reached my car and opened the door. I tossed the file onto the passenger seat. The file labeled home. It was over. The broken plate was documented. The dangerous daughter narrative was dead. The money was safe. I looked back one last time. I saw Marla standing alone by her car, arguing with a police officer. I saw Evan and Dad standing together, two men who had to learn how to be a family without a dictator. I wasn't the villain anymore, but I wasn't the victim either. I was just Lena. And as I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, leaving the drama of Ridgewood Hills in my rearview mirror, I realized that for the first time in my life, the road ahead was entirely my own design. I didn't drive back to the house. I drove toward the highway, toward the city, toward the future. The plate was broken, but I was whole. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Marla's downfall. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come to light, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.